This story begins with a small village where they circulate rumors about a mercenary who walks completely dead on this. A madman who acts like he doesn't care about dying, and that in fact it shows, aided every time he comes out alive. It does not matter for which side. Where there are battles, there will be a man who instead of money just seems to be looking for a place to die. His name is Yuri Briol III, prince of which it was once a large royal family, and responsible for having brought his kingdom to ruin. He was the only one superviviente, but in order to understand all this we must go back 10 years in the past where Yuri, only years old, passed by every night without fail, betting in the casino with his friends including Hernando the head of the court, and he insisted that it was time to return, or else they would be late again. But the problem begins when others try to accuse him of cheating, and haughtily Yuri let them know that they shouldn't mess with someone like him. The problem is that they don't just think they belong to the family, but they took the opportunity to insult the king for being a real so stupid to mess with the empire, and increase the tension of war, and, as you can imagine, the prota did not take it well at all, and gave them a beating with which he stained the casino floor with blood, arriving late for his meeting with a woman. Very particular train of Aruna Great. Zayn the princess of the enemy empire, and the latter claimed that he had to work very hard to get there without anyone. I saw him insisting that he must be very careful with what he does and says, which is enough for her to throw the necklace you gave him on the ground, insisting that he should give it to another woman, in which you do trust, and he does that. He just left and he wondered what he should do for your forgiveness, not to mention that the whole conversation was heard by a mysterious person with very bad intentions. And from then on, the unstable relations between the two countries sides are breaking up, and the ferocious puts aside the simple provocations to start gaining ground on the border with small attacks until one night, Yuri wakes up amidst screams and destruction, discovering that the empire had invaded his kingdom, and at that time tensions turned into a real war, endlessly with countless sacrifices, including the disappearance of his father, the famous Fior, Viral considered the strongest man on the continent. Ikansu absence the war began to tilt below the empire, that were winning battle after battle, and in a winning streak that at the beginning the Herta thought it was a coincidence, until he realized that Trina had betrayed him, using all the information he told her throughout the year of the relationship to attack, at the time, one weaker and defenseless war. The worst thing is that even with all the evidence in hand, still wanted trust her, but a note with the word sorry was all he needed to confirm that the fall of his kingdom, it would be your fault, and once all, the Prota was the only person in his family. The elderly are standing, warriors of the empire rushed against him, in rounds and attacking rounds, were having all the ones to lose, continued to struggle even, came to surround him between dozens of enemies, but even though he was ready to die, the few allies who were still alive, joined together to sacrifice for him, insisting that as long as the family is still alive, Briol will still have a future ahead of him. And with that in mind, carrying with him the life of his entire people too, Yuri had no choice but to flee, hiding like a rat in abandoned houses, while wondering what happened to his father, that if there is still hope that he will return to the empire, already took it upon itself to annihilate it, and at that moment he was found by an enemy monster, but instead of trying to fight, did the only thing that could guarantee the survival of his last name, begging for his life, asking for forgiveness, and the surprise came when the enemy hero told him that the empire will pay for his sins someday, revealing that there is still time to flee, and if he wants to live, has to run. And so Yuri continued on his way, clinging to the idea that he would take revenge, but it did not take him long to realize the reality was senseless bloodshed. They all died, and the only thing left for him to do is to fight, until someone annihilates it and can reconnect with your family. And that takes us back to the present, when after one of the many suicide battles is cornered by another boy, who tells him that an Ichthos like him does not deserve death, and calls him by his real name. And at that time, Yuri realizes that Asians know him. But that's not all, because he also insists that the destruction of the kingdom was his fault. And the worst comes when his face is revealed. Lauren, one of the oldest subordinates, and the first to sacrifice his life to save it. Of course he's supposed to be dead, and the surprise causes the Prota to be unable to move, not even when they draw their sword and jump on him, stabbing him right in the chest. However, the death that had sought is not enough to alleviate their guilt, and can only think how much he likes it and trusts everything, and at that moment, something happens when you open your eyes again. Up as its youngest version. And at that time a voice tells him he can't believe who has slept for 3 whole days, and by turning the pro of coming face to face with his father, who of course should be dead. That is precisely why their first reaction is to assume that they are both in hell, what I had already expected because of their sins. But it also makes sense to his father, saying that despite always preaching honor, the truth is that he had quite a life, decadent, and of course the king's reaction is to give a blow to the head, asking him to stop talking, and Yuri remains convinced that this must be a kind of illusion. Until a leaf slowly falls in front of him, and looks out the window, noting that everything is too peaceful to deal with hell, and assumes he should be in a place full of pain, sins, and demons mocking of the horrible fate that lies with it, but instead is already facing his father and his siblings, the people he came to love most in the world. Your surprise is so much booze, but when he wakes up, it does not take him long to realize that the reality is that it has gone back in time, specifically to when I was only 13 years old, with the same events as back then, repeated exactly, and has no doubt that life has given him a new opportunity, and that is why he himself decides to start a very strict routine, where you get up very early in the morning to train, being killed by Emma, his maid, staff that always serves you with a smile, but that in the past, or rather, the future of the other timeline, was annihilated in front of her own eyes, without him being able to do anything to protect her, and the memories are so dark that Yuri asks him to slap him in the face, partly to wake up and partly to because he feels he deserves it, so that later, to confirm that he will not be locked up for treason. Emma also complies that the asshole introduces himself to his training, with all my face swollen around. The other young people are mocking. However, his teacher says nothing, and just fight him again and again. A teaching method that Yuri remembers very well, because in the other timeline, he always insisted that the protag was talented but lacked discipline, and that even could become the strongest in the kingdom if it showed a little more willpower. The problem is that when Yuri hears that, became much lazier, to the point in which his teacher started training only with combats, not even bothering themselves by understanding their posture or teaching them new movements. And with that in mind, Yuri takes the opportunity to ask him to start from scratch, that from now on he wants me to show him how it should be shown, promising to take care of, give their all. Although surprised, his teacher accepts, and change is immediate, as their expression and posture change radically, that from now on, real training begins, and attacks him with such strength that Yuri is forced to retreat and ask for a little patience, since he clearly forgot something important on that subject, the fact that in his youth he was known as the Devil of the Sword. A couple of hours later, the Prota falls to the ground, unable to believe that this is the training he missed throughout his past life, and is grateful to have experienced as a mercenary, or I would have beaten to a pulp. He can't complain, because he knows that this way he will improve, but the most surprised is his teacher, who can't believe he blocked most of the attacks, wondering at what point he improved so much. Sin embargo, son, interrupted by the arrival of Emma, who is looking for the protagonist desperately to meet with Count Johannens, who has come to visit with his son. The problem is that the Count's son is none other than responsible to betray the kingdom and open the doors of the empire in his past life. God, barbarian whom he definitely does not plan to get away with it. That leads to dinner between his brothers, his father God, and the Count, who points out how much Yuri has changed since the last time he saw it, because has acquired better manners, and his physique has improved, comparing him over and over again to his son God. Of course, the attitude of the Prota also stands out to both, as he stares at the poor man with a murderous gaze that not only puts it uncomfortable, but alerts the second brother, asking him if something happened between him and that boy. The funniest thing is that without thong hairs, Yuri tells him he's a fucking traitor, so even though his brother has no idea what he means, recommends you to put it in its place, and knows that there is still time to prevent it from being one of the pieces that the kingdom will carry us to ruin. And that is where he remembers that in the other timeline, had a fight where he was beaten up and humiliated him to such an extent that the only thing that occurs to him is that the resentment that led him to betray him has been born. So he decides to follow a route similar but different, challenging him to a fight to prove his abilities. At first God refuses, unsure of wanting to fight one of the princes. However, Yuri does not even have time of thinking about it, and attacks with everything it has, just giving him time to block. The worst thing is that he uses well-behaved strategies, lines like throwing sand on your face to dry it, because this one asks you to respect the toy codes, but the Prota does not listen to it, and instead releases his sword, taking advantage of the surprise factor to cut the distance and give him a direct kick in the chest that leaves him lying on the ground. Of course, Yuri understands that in his past life, he is responsible for selling his father's honor, the Empire, in exchange for information, and maybe you shouldn't trust him. However, it cannot ignore that what led him to that was a moment of pure despair, so he offers her his hand, committed to helping him not to follow this path, and that together he has sufficient conviction to fight. And after that God leaves, and Yuri stays with his brother, who congratulates him, telling him it wasn't bad at all, and admits that part of him thought he would lose, because so far only had given him the impression of being a spoiled brat, gambling a tick, which the protagonist denies but insists he plans to change, and that he should also see that as a sign for improvement. And in the evening he goes to train with his teacher, who leaves him ground and tells him that it is already time to start learning the mana control method. Specifically the method, family special, Brill, that is just what an hair like him needs. The problem is that the prota has already dominated this method in his past life, and even almost reached the maximum limit. So you would like to try something else. A technique he was not even able to try at that time. That is why he asks you to recommend him. Someone talented from the royal guard, someone with pure potential. And his teacher recommends Jared, who Yuri remembers meeting in the last years of his past life. The surprise is that what he sought is far away than I would expect from someone with potential. The truth is that this guy was quite mediocre, a pathetic bastard who is surprised that he has survived so long. But at that time he heard him complain many times of not having trained enough as a young man, of not having exploited talent that everyone said they had. I think that after a little more thought, it prepares itself to go and meet to his next spouse and bring him to his senses, to become, in what was always destined to be. With that in mind, Yuri performs at the of Engineers, where he watches rookies train with all that they have, and without wasting time asked by Jared, discovering that his teacher did not exaggerate when he said he was the most talented of the new generation. For a while, everyone else is to put up a fight. Moderately decent Jared stands out without sweating a single one. The problem is that this lack of desire will eventually lead to that turns into a rusty sword, erasing any talent that has. And to solve that, Yuri decides to do the same as with God, fight, and asks the training manager, who wants to join, directly selecting Jared as his opponent. And no matter if it surpasses it, as by 3 heads tall, stands in front of him, confessing that he has heard a lot about him, and asking him to show you what kind of toy it is. And to all of these, Jared does not understand what is going on, and does not even have any interest in fighting, but he has no choice but to accept, and Yuri begins with the battle, lunging at him with a rather remarkable intensity. However, what is really impressive in reality is Jared, who is able to block it and keep up with it, without even moving from the site, with movements sharp and accurate, pointing out that he had the victory. Or at least it seemed so at the beginning, since the pro was slow but steadily reducing distance, pressing more and more, while its rhythm with that of Jared from be so evenly matched that Yuri proposes to make things more interesting. Will begin to fight in earnest, and in this way attacks with one of its most advanced movements, being surprised that although with some difficulty, Jared blocks it perfectly, demonstrating that his butts are those of a beast. But of course he is not the only one surprised, because Jared acknowledges that it cannot continue taking it easy, and now he is starting to fight seriously, to the point where Yuri can only think that he has no chance of winning. The good thing is that it was never really his goal but to press him enough to motivate him. And that implies giving everything of itself to give it a direct hit, which luckily succeeds in doing. Note those present, super impressed by how well he fights, being just a child, and automatically asks him if he was not contained, and Jared states that, not at all, however it weighs, that he is in control of the battle. For some reason you feel cornered, and the idea of fighting for equality of conditions with a simple dwarf frustrates him so much that a bright blue-colored energy wraps his sword all around. Panic, because that can mean one thing. Is using a Mana method against one of the princes, and without wasting time they yell at him to stop, but it is too late now. Jared lashes out at the protag, who is barely able to dodge the next attack, and ends with several strands of hair cut off to the intensity of the cut, and there is no doubt that if we have not avoided it, may have lost his mind. And when he finally realizes what Jared did, panics, asking him to forgive him. The surprise here is that after the shock, Yuri tells him that he has nothing to do with concern and asks him to attack again, because now things are about to become interesting. And quickly the protag attacks again with even greater speed, to which he had shown before. And while the Jared goes with it, you can see that his eyes of that brat are very different from him as a maniac who gives him 100% in each of its movements, and that it seems its only mission is to push it to the limit. However, even knowing that it work, because it cannot avoid fall into their provocations and want to move much further of what he once thought possible. With that in mind, the initial position, lazy that had changed completely, defensively, and can feel like his blood begins to boil with an intensity that has never before been experienced, even when he had faced opponents stronger than him, and without hesitation twice, attacks again, and the protag responds in such a way who admits it's the best battle he's ever had, because for the first time in his life he wants to win, hitting with such intensity that it leaves the protest's sword into what officially marks the end of the battle. Automatically, Yuri extends his hand and tells him that he learned something from him. He possesses a strength latent like no other. And Jared thinks the same, recognizing that the brat show a fighting spirit that I would expect from a warrior, not from a lesser of the princes. Astonishment comes when the prota insists that he will have to pay for having injured a person, so that the poor goes out to get a first aid kit, while the rest of the trainees congratulate him for having followed the pace of one of his own. However, they are not the only ones who saw the fight, because at that point they realize that everything was witnessed by Saineth, the captain of the Royal Guard of Brielle, who has not yet finished processing the hidden jewels you have just found. After that a few days pass, until Yuri and intercepts Jared in the corridors of the barracks, asking him to follow him, because they have to go to a place very particular to what the blonde insists he has to train, but the prota does not give up, reminding him that this change of attitude and improvement of discipline is thanks to him. In a nutshell, owes him one for ceasing to be mediocre. Although he knows he still has a long way to go for running before he has his mental strength and even he is from his body, but that will not be enough for now. The surprise comes when he affirms that they were not alone, but with someone else, Fernando, who was one of his best friends in the other timeline but who is now just a magician. Court beginner of course here. Hardly knows him, so even this one is also insists he has other things to do and uses his privileges as a prince to bribe him by expressing that it is willing to pay off all the debt it owes. In the casino automatically the poor guy's eyes shine. Of illusion. However, he asks him why he should trust him, when he is also a psychopath, addicted to the game who plays it, betting even more than him, and in the end Yuri asks him to trust only and give him his word, but Hernando wants something else to confirm with a deal of iron clear that even being the prince and blah 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 his mere word is not worth much to say, and the prota even asks Jared to witness his goodwill. And between a rock and a hard place the blonde accepts, agreeing on the sole condition of being honest, and tell them where they are going, and why he needs a hero and a magician for that. And finally Yuri confesses that his destiny is the Mountain of the Sword, and the mission is to help him loot the dungeon of their ancestors, and for this purpose begin their journey in a tunnel complex located just outside the city, under the palace which, according to the prota, dry right at the entrance to the mountain, a site marked by a strong legend on his chest, known to all in the empire, and what others do not know, and that the prota saw firsthand in his past life, is that after the empire invaded, Viral discovered that the legend was true, and effectively there was a great dungeon inside the Mountain of the Sword, where the first leader of the Brielle family had hidden treasures, and in the process they had also discovered those passages, and the point is that thanks to that they were invented to use the legacy of the Coldal first than they are, something that the prota will not allow, because in this light will do everything in its power to move forward instead of also wants to see live the legacy that the empire has given it. So they go on until they leave at the foot of the mountain, through a door whose key the protagonist always had its reach, but it wasn't until the recording of the empire that he discovered what it was for, and of course, Fernando has many doubts about how the fuck he knows so many things, of which not even his siblings are aware. If however, Yuri asks him to shut up and warns him about plants around that they are poisonous and will make it pass for a bad time if you don't watch your movements. Yet the way he moves around the place to look as if it had traveled several times in the past, and it does not happen. Unnoticed by the boys, those who wonder what happened. He was stunned, and they joke a little until it comes out of nowhere. Yuri shouts for them to stop, warning them about the presence of a wolf pack. The strange thing is that in this case, is that it is moving in too large a group, so that they can easily defeat them. Surprising Hernando, because the fact that he knows both about those creatures can only mean one thing. He is the worst bearing brat of the kingdom that read in a book. No matter what, Yuri asks them to move carefully, but everything goes to hell right there. Fernando ends up stepping on a twig, generating more than enough noise for a wolf to be thrown against him, and would have rotting in seconds, if not for Jared, that ended up cutting his neck with a single blow. The part interesting is that without knowing anything about these creatures, use mana to that his fur was too thick for a normal blow, for which the prota congratulates him, but also points to an error. Jurgle have not only attracted the attention of the rest of the herd, but also of the alpha, which automatically gives the order to attack, so in a matter of seconds they finish being heroes, and Jared decides to take the reins by defeating them one by one. The problem that it is still not enough, and the wolves begin to take the lead. Just for that reason, Yuri orders him to the magician to join, and show why his father trusted both, something that he accepts more than delightedly by releasing dozens of fireballs it controls. His craving to turn wolves into ashes after that attracts the attention of more gentlemen, but the point is that they defeat them all and finally reach the top of the Mountain of the Sword, where there is absolutely nothing, to the point where Yair asks him if he is sure that this is the right place. However, Yuri ignores him and starts looking for him, noticing a small bright red dot outstanding from the earth that, when burrowing a little more, turns out to be the handle of a great sword. The most interesting thing is that a simple view does not even appear to have been buried for centuries, because it looks completely new, and the rare is that he has the word guilty on his sheet of paper, and Dard asks him if that's the great relic of the founder, to which the protagonist responds, who is not sure, but that they can find out because in that the ground under they start to collapse until they fall in a deep well that is nothing more than the entrance of the secret dungeon of the Brielle family, and when they finally touch the ground, Yuri notices that Jared protected it by the fall of both with a cloak, thick mana, While Hernando descends quietly using extra air magic, the magician takes advantage of other techniques to light the way, encountering a long corridor that seems to completely empty until you see something more, the spirit of a covered paradise, of a thick, very dark fog, and automatically the Proto recognizes it as a miracle of death. That can only mean danger, because of what he orders Jared to stand up, and although the poor man has not yet recovered from the fall, just need to give a couple of kicks to make him stand up in front of him ready to protect it from the threat. The problem now is that just as his name indicated, the shoulders of death are ancient warriors who returned from death, with the particularity that they ended up becoming even stronger than they were in life. And as the seconds go by, Yuri discovers something else. This is because its real function is to protect the Emperor's dungeon. That means it should not be hostile against him as he possesses royal blood, and his theory is confirmed when he stops in front of him and the monster pulls out his sword, but not to attack him, but to nail it to the floor. As a sign of respect, of course, Hernando almost had a heart attack, and what is interesting comes when the boy speaks to him, insisting that his attitude towards descendants equal to that of Erich Briol, name that they automatically recognize. The famous swordsman who conquered that continent with a single sword, the founder of the kingdom in which they currently live. And with tears the Prota asks him if he is the first one to enter there, and Yahello answers that yes, and that only the descendants of the family Briol can unravel that sword. The same sword he used at the time. That is why he asks him what his intentions are. With that place to which Yuri is formally presenting himself, demanding that he hand over the legacy of the founder as his legitimate right. Automatically the dungeon enters into a deep silence, until the boy asks him to follow him, for this is the reason by which it was put there in the first place. And while retreating, Jared can't help but think that something is very strange in this whole situation, to which the Perta tells him to stop wasting time and come with them, and the astonishment comes when your words are mixed with visions of the other timeline that of course Jared does not quite understand, and assumes he is just stressed about the whole situation. And this is how they arrive to a series of crystals, where the governor just tells them to wait, that they are worthy, and out of nowhere, these begin to shine, transporting them to a warehouse, or at least, that's what it looked like, because when the Perta turns sideways looking for the others, realizes that he is all alone, except for a human-shaped figure with no face. Kind of that is thrown against the list to fight, and that it is being controlled by a method of mana, and at that time, the figure activates the mana inside to the sword. As if I were teaching him how to manipulate the mana itself, in addition to asking him to imitate his movements. Completely willing to make a kind of mentor. As long as you beat him up and see him wherever I see him. Yuri knows it's crazy about everything, considering that a dwarf of his age did not even should know how to imitate such an advanced technique. But the difference is that he definitely doesn't get in the dwarf category, average, and for the first time in this new life, activates your mana technique. It does not shine with the same intensity than that of the figure, and I couldn't even have stand up in power, but finally thrills his opponent. That notes its determination, and prepares to attack, while the Perta thinks he has to become stronger. Before the Empire ruins, your life forever happens. Whatever happens will never make the same mistake as before. And the more you fight with the figure, the clearer it is to you, which is a representation of the techniques of the founder, and will be responsible for learning each of its movements, while having the opportunity. Jared wake up in a room, identical to the training camps of the kingdom, and wonders if it is a dream, until he feels something around and asks him to attack, meeting face to face with a double identical to him, so he has no doubt that defeating himself must be part of the test of the miracle of death. The strange thing is that difference from the figure, which the other player faces, dared to speak up, asking him to stop defying his destiny, reminding him that he became a royal guard, because I wanted to have a comfortable life, so it should be maintained, away from the prince, if he does not want his life to be filled with challenges and difficulties. Of course such a forceful statement leaves him thinking, however, the same. Jared acknowledges that he has changed. The truth is that the Oldal would be 100% in agreement, and would have returned to the palace a long time ago, but the mere memory of the battle against Yuri reminds him that out there is more than its own comfort. And besides that, he is excited about the desire to achieve something. That's exactly why he lets you know, which is a bit, and no longer the same. A sword that was already tough can't stop with words empty, and he will not hesitate. Automatically the clone activates its aura and attacks with such a powerful blow, but quite simple, that Jared blocks without any problem, noting that his opponent fights just as he would have done him in the past, with a lazy attitude, simple strategies, a natural need not to take the slightest risk. A completely boring technique that today he views with disdain, giving him several direct blows until he knocks him down, telling him it's fucking boring, and out of nowhere the clone begins to melt, to become a golem, play giant, a real way that the Prota has to be facing at the same time. That is why before attacking, pray for it to be able to overcome it no matter what. And with that in mind, we return to the Battle of Yuri, noting that things in the game have changed so much as before, were miles and miles of lifeless sand, is now a landscape framed by the destruction of swords. The worst thing is that one of those destroyed rocks is the body of the who is not even able to move, flee, while the figure approaches him ready to defeat him and attacks. Back door. Nothing but the impact of the blow and the traces of the man. Unfortunately, when we see it from another angle, the result is very different from what we could imagine. Since in that last second, before impact, Yuri manages to take his sword and correctly activate the Mana method, giving him the first direct blow of the whole fight. Of course, he also acknowledges that it would not have been possible to without such forced training and the beating that the founder had given him until now. But when he sees that the sword of the figure begins to roll, and little by little the figure begins to disappear into the air, even says goodbye to him, which can only mean that time is up. And Yuri takes the opportunity to thank him for everything he taught her, and in that way, both he and Jared and Hernando return to the cave, where the Angel of Death was already waiting for them, and explains that what they have just experienced is the founder's legacy, who left part of his conscience for the first heir to the family, Briel, who manages to get there, and he. Perta recalls that in his path life the mountain gained, being completely destroyed by the Empire, which means that technically neither I would like to have carried out the founder's test. The most interesting thing is that the method of Manhwa, who didn't even teach him, is the one who dies in his glory years, and not one that dies in his last days, bringing together all the knowledge he has acquired in his life. They are techniques that no one else knows. The dungeon is also designed to open by itself at the right time, which means that the only reason why Yuri could enter it is because the time has come to use and transmit that power. Of course, what he decides to do with that is his decision, and the only thing you can tell him is that at this moment, has a name, the technique of separation of souls. However, it's not the only thing in that dungeon. For the Angel of Death asks him to kneel down, because they are about to happen to him, the founder's legacy for which he must never swear, fear their enemies, act in a manner, sign according to what you think is right, and do the job of the Briols to the end. And among each of these doctrines Yuri shouts, strong and clear, that yes, to which the boy pulls her hair to bring her looks together, and asks you to remember very well that a Briol never leaves home, not even when it means death. That is the founder's legacy, and Yuri's eyes shine in a way in which we can have. I'm sure he understands it more than ever now. And then they return to the palace. A few days go by until that Emma wakes him up very early in the morning, insisting that the moment has arrived and that he should not have gone to bed so late the night before, to which the Perta explains that there was something I needed to find. Of course, it is not very specific with her, because we see that he was looking for a registry among the documents of the royal family until Dave with a small note where they clarified that the founder had not been an only child, but had a brother, a man who abandoned home and disappeared from history without even leaving a name. That man is the Angel of Death, who showed him the truth, and most likely the true owner of the sword, who left aside any glory to serve his brother and the kingdom to the death. And at that, Emma insists that her father is calling him, and although he does not know the reason, he knows that he gave the order just after meeting with Hernando, so that it is clear to him that the magician does not hesitate to tell his father everything you did that night. Well, it's not like that, Shadow, because he warned him that he would, so there is no other way, rather than running in the throne room, where his last explanation for everything that happened is nothing more than his word. But now he has a new sword to prove it, and at first his father doesn't say much, and just approaching to him, pointing out that his attitude is not the same for some time now, so he wants to know why caused that change in him, and although Yuri thinks about it a lot, finally confesses part of the truth, insisting that he had a dream where he lived firsthand how to committed a crime that led to everything going to hell. For his part, his father asks him what crime he is referring to. The Perta confesses that it is the crime of not having protected a Briol to the end. And in his dream the kingdom was in the midst of a war, and many people were massacred, but he, even though tried to protect them with everything they had, ended up failing again and again until the kingdom fell, and he made the most cowardly decision of all, fleeing, leaving behind his honor. And in the end he died, and most importantly is that after of the dream the necklace that his mother gave him had disappeared, so he has a feeling that sleep was a warning from his mother, a way to give a second chance. The problem is that even though his father wants to know more details about who started the war, the Prota knows it's too soon to mention the Empire, so he insists that it was the work of an army that cannot identify them, by leaving them with more questions than answers. And that's why it only is pleased that this change will be for the better, and Yuri thinks that all he wants is to redeem oneself for their sins, when his father tells him that there is something else they need to talk about, and that it is time for me to bring out his sword, and at that moment they tell us a little more about it. About the king who learned to fight from the very first moment, who learned to walk, and who wrote his name in history as the strongest among the best days of the continent, and currently Yuri knows he is in his prime, so he is to be the first child to be invited to his living room of personal training, and Fior confesses that all this time he thought that none of his children had inherited his talent for the sword. In a nutshell, I saw them as a pile of corpses. What the protagonist tries to defend himself by saying he has talent, causing his father to challenge him to a duel, while asking me to define him, what it means to have talent. Is the force the speed, this or having all that stuff with automatically to someone in a good swordsman, or there are something more. At that moment the protagonist recalls it's me from the past, knowing that he definitely had all these attributes. But before I can say anything, his father says no, because there is something more important than any of these things, and it is the element capable of making to a person exceed its limits. Something stronger than fear or feeling of duty and of nothingness. Fior activates its mana method, and less than a fraction of a second, the protagonist can feel the aura around the entire room changes radically, causing your body to go into survival mode. Fortunately, his father keeps sword and aura return to normal, explaining that for him this factor is the call of the sword that makes it clear to him that this is his way of the protagonist, who wonders if he is referring to the destination understood, that his past life was not meant to go on the way of the swordsman. While in this life, something has changed, and firmly, his father asks him if he thinks he is destined to wield a sword. If he believes that even at the time of his death he will remain firm to its principles, the desire to fight, something that the prota is not yet 100% sure of. But everything takes on a darker tone when the figure of his father is no longer the figure of his father, and turns into dozens of red eyes who look at him from above with. And out of nowhere the prota is surrounded by nothing but garbage. Listen to the screams of all those who die in the afterlife to protect it, accompanied by images of the destruction of the kingdom. Images that are more than simple. Memories feel as if they have been transported again to that moment where he is gradually killed by soldiers, enemies advancing towards him to get rid of the last. And so more than a memory. That horrible moment is transported again. Everything was so real that the heat of the kingdom warmed up, your armor and the attacks he begins to receive by the sword put him alert, knowing that it was a movement in false and it is already finished. That is why he begins to defend himself and to fight, just like the other time, until he hears voices screaming at him to flee because they will be in charge of stopping the enemies. And again his men save his life, dying in the worst way in front of his eyes, while he wonders if everything new he experienced was just a dream, and if anything, the fate of Burial has always been falling in the most horrible way, and no matter how hard I try, he can never help it. And the difference between this and the timeline is that there he has the sword of the Angel of Death, and embracing the blade that says guilty. The Prota remembers that he has already taken an oath not to fear their enemies, whatever happens, and one by one the words of the Angel of Death flood your mind by acting in accordance with to their beliefs, fulfilling Burial's duty to the end, and just fight. And from there, the memory changes, because instead of fleeing, Yuri stays fighting with the others, and blow after blow begins to eliminate the enemies, regardless of the fact that the odds of winning are annulments. In fact, ends up being failure, just like last time. But instead of thinking about everything that could go wrong, think of everything that could go well, and activates their aura by making it clear to them that the people of Briel do not even abandon their power. In the face of death, and with faith intact, he throws himself against them, ready to fight to the last breath. Yet in that the image so vivid that it had been, having only disappears, being replaced by the training room roof, his father's staff, where the prota repeats over and over again until the end, as if I were in a kind of trance. To his tam, strange that even his father cares when he sees his eyes dyed a bright red color, and asks him if he can hear him several times, until Yuri wakes up confused, because seconds ago had been surrounded by the Black Army. Fortunately, his father keeps calm. He insists that everything he saw was nothing more than an illusion, but his face is characteristic of ideal face, and at the same time whose, because in his posture and conviction he was able to see that its destiny points to only one thing, wielding the sword, also causing Yuri to smiles not only at his father's approval, but because to live again. That war reminded him that it is not destiny, it is fact, that he has already made the decision to change his future, to improve. However, he is not a fool. He can see in his father's eyes, who is worried and looks at him as if he was going to die at any second from what he was, jokes a little bit by telling him to leave things in his hands. After all, he is a genius at that the latter gives him a blow so hard that when he presents himself to his daily training, it is as if it had a second head, earning the mockery of his teacher, who insists that even then he will not get rid of what they have prepared for him in this opportunity. And that's something Yuri knows, though. Meeting him makes you wonder why he stayed in Burial all those years instead to return to his homeland, natal. And this one explains to him that it was because of a condition that he accepted in order to someday have the right to a duel with his father. Logically, that means that someday will leave, so that the Pertat asks him if he is willing to stay if he asks him to do so, but the answer is no. The reason why he would stay longer is to be shown to something interesting, such as the famous lost sword technique of the founder. Clearly your teacher already knows what really constituted the recording that he had a few days ago. However, although understands that someone as with swords as he is wants to learn a new technique, can't do it, and he tells him it doesn't matter if you have not yet mastered it completely. Just wants to take a look at what the prota tells him that this is not the reason, but because even if it is shown, will not work for you since the founder's technique is linked directly to the method of mana. That's where things get weird, because methods are usually to be used to reinforce the techniques of the swords, but not to part of these. And although the prota confesses that he still does not understand 100% how it works, only knows that if he teaches it to her, he will only receive part of the information and not the complete technique. The thing is, your teacher doesn't care, and he is so curious that he is willing to stay intoxicated for as long as he wants to, if you teach him at least half of it, of the technique, because he is sure to be able to get him out of the quite useful. And after, to make fun of his arrogance, Yuri accepts, expressing him to stay in Briel, and then activate your meta method, along with its soul cut, and was ready to attack when his teacher confesses that he actually, I'd always intended to stay in Briel, at least 10 more years, so he did look like an asshole. He will take advantage of this. The new challenge, he has to learn as much as he can. And with that said, the teacher prepares to attack, and Yuri takes advantage of the rage of being humiliated to throw himself against him with all that he has, giving way to one of the best training until now. And later the prota returns to his room, where you can think a little in the way that the future is changing, and he has no left doubts that the vision he had previously not 100% a memory of the past, nor a senseless illusion, but a projection of the future, according to the small changes it has made so far. The fact that your teacher has taken the same to the decision to stay is also proof of this, and although it appears that these changes are still not enough to avoid the war with the Empire, it is obvious that every little step contributes fleece to something bigger. The worst thing is that he knows that everything depends on him, and whatever you decide why you should do something else you can do to stop the Empire once and for all. And then Emma appears, for his part, asking him to stop getting into trouble and waste time when he knows he has a meeting tomorrow with none other than the Senate of the kingdom, something that his own father, and for the first time in a long time, all senators will attend. So he needs to promise that he will behave well and not fight with none of them. And the prota tries to explain to him that he no longer behaves like this, but let's say it has preceding it. And with that we move on to the famous meeting, where the main topic of interest is, of course, the founder's sword technique. Several dukes insisting that they cannot let the prince use a mana method that has not been approved. And what is supposed to be a conversation, it would be like about managing the kingdom, out of nowhere becomes a power struggle, followed by where the only thing that really matters is to question the king. And at that moment Yuri finally understands why his father never attended those stupid meetings. Although some deuces insist that this method was left behind by the founder as a legacy, what it means that there is no need to prove it. The question they raise is in whether it really belongs to the founder or everything was invented by the prota, camouflaging it as a supposed concern. Finally Yuri decides to talk how ridiculous it is to call an entire meeting just to talk about him and his method of mana when there are more important things, including the fact of which he knows that most of them are traitors who will hesitate to give you back to the kingdom when the Empire attacks. Of course the latter does not say it out loud and gives him the word. Heald, the captain of the guard, insists that it is still too soon to draw conclusions, for each method usually represents side effects varying from person to person, which the deuces misrepresent. As you said, that there is no certainty that they are safe, and that they should prohibit the prota from using it. The worst thing is that some have the balls to say that this does not necessarily imply anything bad either. Those who go against are in the majority and make pressure to force everyone to take the same path. The problem is that even though that person can change the mana method, this is only achieved when very little time has passed since you learned the first one, though. Due to the battle he had with the founder of the prota, can feel that the cut of the soul has already made roots in its core, so that changing the method could play against you, and tries to find the words to explain it to him. When one of the people that have remained silent finally speaks, the man was asking them how many of them has fought a real battle. Automatically the discussion is exchanged for a deep silence that had only been interrupted by one or the other murmuring until the main duke against the prota asks him who the fuck is he. But above all, what is its title? That's exactly why Ericha stands up, presenting himself as a free Manhwa, sparks some laughter, because a low-level male should not attend a Senate meeting. Far from it. Share your opinion freely as if he were a dude. Yet everything changes when Arancha reveals that he was a guest, personally by the Count Potter, which now keeps them quiet in their chairs. Itor is the leader of the entire territory that protects the borders of Brielle, one of the strongest warriors in the kingdom, well known for never attending to such meetings. Had never bothered even send a representative. So they ask him what he has changed, and he makes it clear to them, which is none of their business. What you can tell them is that all that conversation is stupid, because the type of method of mana does not make much difference on the thing they would know if they were really warriors. And in the end what matters most is the user, which is what the Prota takes the opportunity to emphasize that no one should question the method subject nothing. The founder, and that regardless of their opinion, has already made a decision will learn it. Jiranji insists on following the founder's will, since there is nothing dangerous about it, but on the contrary it is an honor, and wanting to change that was an offense. But his words are a little harsher. That is why you are warned to take care of his Tom, but he is disappointed, noting that losing the label is the result of passing time on the fighting orcs who, by the way, also do not care about the method of herd of the person to cut off their heads, and it seems that the conversation had ended when someone else tries to use the argument that Yuri is still too young to make such decisions. Well, the only way they can know how to. If the safe method is using it and between it and grub, they send them to silence again and again until the ships explode, practically asking him to go back to the border, where all they do is consume resources, and that ends up being a very low blow, because it is known to be a land hostile situation in which soldiers die daily, because of failures including friends of a lifetime ranch that he himself has had to recognize after each massacre. So they do not consume resources for pleasure, and not because the orcs never rest and they are the only ones in charge of stopping them to protect the kingdom. And thanks to that the Protat recalls that in the past there was a massacre, massive around the same time of the year, due to conflicts between Brielle and Klein's army, that the orcs will take advantage of to attack. So he asks him how things have been going lately, to which Arantia tells her that you are more tense than ever, and that many cities have been completely devastated. And at that time Yuri understands that times coincide, and that everything may be related to the Duke's son, but clearly their deductions attract everyone's attention. So he decided to retire, insisting that instead of wasting time with talks, there are many other issues that should be addressed. That said, it goes away. However, his attitude does not pass unnoticed by Fuicha, who, that same evening, it communicates with the Count Fuhrer, telling him absolutely everything, and including rumors about the change in attitude of the, and that look decisive in his eyes. And in the end the Count concludes that it is worth investigating, and makes it his mission to find out as much as he can, which he can find out. Mage accepts and stares out the window for a while, how peaceful the capital is, until something attracts attention. Yuri, who walks the streets completely hooded in someone's attitude, who is about to do something very important. Of course he follows it, but the Protet is not alone, but is accompanied by Hernando. He has no idea where he is headed and all paranoid, reminding him that he is forbidden to leave at that time of day, much less without permission. However, his attitude changes when Yuri reveals that they are not going anywhere. He has no to a casino, specifically the largest illegal casino in the capital city, and as he knows where it is, his mission is to guide Prince Hernando refuses. Resisting instinct, Ludiopeda, who calls him to spend everything he has. But when the Prota tells him that he will have to do it for the good of him, of Brielle, the best excuse he could come up with, things change, and it takes them to light it after that the Prota explains that in his past life, saw 3 people that caused an uproar and helped in the fall of Brielle, who are the leader of the underworld, a tycoon of business with the most successful merchant guild on the continent, and the last person, an murderer who beheads the leader of the underworld and took its place, giving way to an era of terror in the streets of Brielle. These 3 representative pieces is the ones you should start moving at will. So he starts by visiting the casino, where they are received directly by Goryo, professional usurer and the current leader of the underworld, who greets him with such kindness that Yuri, it is clear to him that he already knows who he is. And Goryo, you saw that I couldn't let them visit your establishment without presenting yourself in person, and taking advantage of the fact that they are talking. With honesty, the Protat clarifies that he did not come only to enjoy casual play, phrase that immediately captured, inviting him to sit down so that they can converse, as it should be. The only one dissatisfied with everything is Fernando, who does. He came to bet, but the Prota sent him to shut up, revealing that he came to ask for loan for an investment he has had in mind for a long time. The interesting is that it could easily tell the bank, but here it is, and even though he tries to question him about it, the refuses to tell him exactly why he wants it, just by letting him know what he plans to buy. Wagrinja, a species from the Klein region, which will soon increase its value tremendously. Automatically, Hernando tells him that it is crazy, and Bori insists it is only used for perfume, luxury and little else, but the star insists that he knows very well what he is doing. That leaves both of them thinking, how the fuck is he so sure of something like that? And the Protat asks how much he is willing to lend you, not like the prince, but like Yuri Brielle, and after a little thought about it, Goryo only happens to him. They note to be signed, and they leave without believing it. That it was so easy, nor that I would leave them so much money. And as for Hernando the poor, the only thing that bothers him is that he has pressured him there without letting him play, not a single game, and Yuri insists that the adventure, it is not over yet, because now they will be going to the Merchant Guild. It turns out that their profits are completely insured because it turns out that Manga is a product complex that is only produced by an alchemist who is close to decline and will be the first to die in the approaching civil war. If you buy a large quantity you could go up the price as far as you like. And for that he will drag them into the guild, and that at that time it was nothing more than a house in ruins of course. Fernando tells him that he should get his hands on it, of people more experienced. But let's say Yuri knows the potential of his leader. The next piece of that, just the heir, which opens the door, without understanding who they are. So the prota introduces himself as the prince of and has come to entrust him with a very important task. And after the negotiations they are leaving there, and Hernando this time is more convinced that he has already lost his mind, because it makes no sense to entrust such an amount of money to a business that is clearly in ruins. What he does not know is that although he is currently going through a rough patch, won't be long before lying is known throughout the continent. Not only as a promising trader but also as a promising difference in warrior who will betray anyone in an instant. Is also famous for keeping her promises. These customers, no matter what, in fact its plan is to support it to make it even more legendary in this new timeline. And just when Hernando asks him if he is finished with the crazy rounds, pointing out that they still have something more to do. The most important step of all, and for that purpose it guide through the dark alleys of the city, in search of its third alley, and ends up arriving in the slums where the rats abound and people fight to the death for any piece of bread, and in the middle of that dark place, find the next piece a blue-haired girl, which is currently, but that in a while, will be in charge of eliminating Agorio and climb to the top of the order of called Asana. Like any other person, she is to see a prince in that place. To which the prota tells him that he does not have to put himself at the defensive because it is only there to help, and out of nowhere gives him a bag full of money, and behind Asana's back, notice a rather unhealthy little girl with a smile. Recalling that in his past life the conflict between Asana and Goryeo began when the latter asked him for a large amount of money, so that the small to receive the treatment he desperately needed. The problem is that as everyone else, those who resorted to this man, economy ruined by high interest rates, and have nothing to pay for them with, and that's why it looks forced to become a murderer within its ranks, becoming one of the most skilled and lethal of all. And now the target of the protect is not to use it, but to prevent it from following this path. So he asks her to use that money to treat the little girl. Him that he does not have to give nothing in return, just remember his name Yuri, and after that the prota only returns home, and Hernando asks him why he would give him so much money to a beggar, but its answer is simple, a future investment, and in one night, created bonds with people vital to what is to come. And by this time his plan is almost assembled. It only lacks one more element. But it turns out of nowhere, and asks him what he saw in the founder's grave. Fernando goes silent before answering bets on his vision was playing in one of the most important casinos of the empire, of course the prota not the shadow, and only asks him to keep silent what he saw, which seems to have not lasted long, because the next day the father of the protagonist sends him to call him, asking him where were there last night, and he is honest, confessing that Yuri him straight to the largest casino in the kingdom. That amazes the king, but the biggest surprise, we take it, since Hernando keeps the secret of the prota, insisting that all they did was gamble, and that they ended up losing all the money they brought with them, and after that only walked around as the protagonist was interested in knowing how people live, normal and nothing more, and in the end, returned to the palace without enemies and maintains that same version no matter how much the king asks him if he is doing this. Replied the tycoon with the feeling that there are something else that is being hidden from him, and then he asks him if he plans go to the dance, and to your amazement, Fernando says yes, confessing that he does not usually like such events, but it takes long without dancing, and could be interesting. As for the prota, he resumes his daily training with his teacher, noting that it is very popular among maidens of the palace, which take advantage of the sessions to roam the area. All are reddish. That is exactly why he says yes or yes, we'll have to attend the next dance. But his teacher rules it out, stating that he is not interested, and cares more about talking about the founder's technique since has been analyzing it, and it is clear that it does not have a form and patterns that Yuri can replicate. Tells him that this is what I have been trying to explain to him all that time, is more like a feeling, is like something in your body that tells you that you have to move according to mana flow, flowing through your body. The best thing to do would be to see him fight in a real situation, to be able to study it. However, coordinating something like this is not easy. So he just congratulates him for how quickly it has improved, especially in terms of mana management, confessing that he did not think he was so in that regard, and, in his mind, Herta feels a little bad about not being able to help him and how if read his thoughts. The teacher tells him he has nothing to worry about, and who cares about him as he is suffering too much from, even when he has already achieved much more than any other boy of his age and he hasn't even finished growing up. Yes, however, the Proto rules it out. Quickly he insists that they return to training, now making everything a little more interesting. With real swords and, without hesitation the teacher accepts, and warns himself about what. Yuri proposes that they make a bet. If he wins, will have to go to the dance. And if he loses, nothing, because his teacher interrupts him right there, expressing to him that he is humble, because there is no way that you may lose. That's exactly why the dog throws himself against him, ready to force him to swallow his words. But although it definitely loses, interesting things come at a change of scene when, days later, several carriages pass through the gates of the city. And in this one goes to George, the second prince of the empire, accompanied by a person we already know, Trina, who insists that she is excited. There is someone who has wanted to see it for a long time. It is most likely that the is referring to the Pertat, who at that very moment was, for like everything, mannequin, while Emma finishes getting him ready for the famous dance, and throughout the process, he keeps complaining about the ostentatiousness of the outfit, but once ready, does not hesitate to extend a hand to him and ask him to dance with him because he needs to practice with someone. That's what seems to be the beginning of something half romantic. He goes to hell when she looks at him with a face like he's distressed because I may step on his foot, and Yuri accepts that he cannot guarantee you anything before taking it firmly, stating that it has nothing to do with, and that nothing. Jokes are replaced by a strong blushing on the part of the girl, who tells her that she is a very good dancer with a lot of experience. Although it is true that never is danced with someone so short, and in the end they end up having a very nice moment, and love what ends being the preamble to the perfect dance where the king observes all the darkness over his throne, and while the and his siblings take the opportunity to catch up that and to observe the political environment, noting that even the awardor decided to attend the ball. Very rare. He also sees that his older brother is starting to use lenses more frequently, to which he tells him that he has nothing to worry about, and the conversation is interrupted by the loud sound of the doors opening up to the arrival of George, who is advancing straight ahead towards Safior, presenting himself, thanking him for the invitation and blah blah blah. And of course he did not come alone, but with Triana, who bows before them with the beauty of a nymph, and the Protot is paralyzed, thinking about the beautiful relationship they had, an image that collapses in a matter of seconds when he remembers the betrayal and the cynical letter that the unfortunate woman asked for forgiveness. Just for that reason Yuri tells himself that he cannot commit again the same mistake. He keeps her eyes down, while she keeps seeing him with supposed kindness. And after that the Proto manages to get away a little bit, and is distracted by watching Cedric, his brother, older, who dances with all the ladies at the party, not for womanizer, but because she is so kind that she doesn't want anyone to feel so badly. The problem begins when you notice that Trina keeps watching him and wonders how he should act before a person that technically has done nothing wrong yet but revives horribly. Memories I could never forget. Fortunately, Emma arrives at, offering him a cookie and joking a little, him changing his appearance instantly. A feeling that does not last long, because right there it is approaching George, who brings back just as many bad memories by being responsible for leading the troops of the Empire. On the and at the end of the day, one could say that he is the man who carried Gabriel to ruin. However, it cannot show or usefulness openly, for what she greets him as kindly as she can, while the blonde analyzes it with a look. But that's not all, because out of nowhere, George smiles, ends his method of mana by emitting waves of pure sharp aura that invade the body of the Protat, almost completely paralyzing it. The good thing is that Yuri gets, impressing the blonde guy who just retires, but not before, admit he is a very talented boy. In a nutshell, that event was a way to test it, but also intimidate him, to the point where Yuri knows that it is nothing different from the version I met in the other timeline. And everything goes to hell when it sounds a loud noise, and when turning around goes Emma, kneeling in front of George, trying to apologize to him desperately as she stumbled upon him watching wine on the cape of the symbol of empire. Automatically George sees the concern in the face of the and he, instead of telling the girl that there is no problem, smiles before drawing his sword, warning him that he committed a very serious error, one that according to the rules of the crown must be punished with death. The worst thing is that it is clear to him that it was not an accident. The bastard did it on purpose to show its in real curiously in plain sight. Emma is to blame, and George insists again and again that he must pay, adding that a decapitation should be sufficient to clear its name according to the law. And at that moment he has the nerve to show a look as shameless as the one he dedicated to the star moments ago, and although it looks like he was about to throw it on himself, luckily his father does not hesitate to stand up, insisting that if he wants to see blood, to do so with his own people. George automatically saves his sword and disappoints himself. The Empire and Brielle have maintained very good relations so far, claiming what Cole agrees, but it will not last a lot if you continue to disrespect them in this way. The problem begins when George asks him to remember that opportunity on which he himself executed to a castle of the Empire and to keep things in peace. The Emperor decided to let him pass without having to assume any responsibility, and insists that this is the same as that time, so that he should be able to execute that made to even things out, in addition to insists it does not because he wants to, but because it is just enough to make an argument. Shameless that unfortunately puts the Fior in check, and for that point, even the Breton has to challenge George, would be to challenge the Empire, and his mind is flooded with endless possibilities of outcomes for this situation. The detail is that he now has an oath to keep. The bold ones do not give up his honor, so even though this could complicate the even more so, do not hesitate to step forward by clarifying that she is their personal maid and therefore her mistakes are hers. In a nutshell, is willing to receive punishment instead of Emma, which sounds crazy to everyone except for Yuri, who thinks that all that time is and doesn't mind dying doing the right thing. But it's not like he plans to die without a fight either, so he asks George that instead of executing her, solve that with a combat trial. Surprising me with the point, who begins to laugh out loud and accepts, asking the king. Already agrees with me to work things out in this way, and with some doubts, but knowing that he can't retract and make Yuri Fior look bad. Accepts what George insists that it would not be fair for them to fight each other, so he will name the youngest of his royal guard to represent it. Behind that just goes away, and the Prota thanks him by approaching Emma to help her get up from the scare of death that he has just had, and she begins to cry, asking him how he could do something like this so lightly, but he tells her he has nothing to do with it, and in that you notice that Trina keeps looking at it, and even though a stupid part of it feels the impulse to talk to him as soon as he walks away, being observed by all including Fernando, and already on the way to his room is intercepted by Cedric asking him what he was thinking, and as for the Prota, tells her that she simply couldn't let Emma be killed, smiles and caresses his head, quite proud, and the Prota takes those seconds to appreciate his brother's closeness. But the interesting thing comes when the same Cedric offers his help, clarifying that George's deal was not as thoughtful as it made the he replaced by a representative of a similar age. The Prota could be an accident. I could kill him and get away with it. Luckily Yuri, he already knows it, and even though it is Edric offers to fight for him, insists that a prince must finish what he started, and his brother must finish. I couldn't be prouder. Asking him to go to rest very soon. Has a battle to win, and Yuri thinks his brother is one of the people, kind as people you know. And part of the reason why he wants to save Briole is to see what kind of kingdom could be under the hands of someone like him. And the next day, the duel is presented where George's unfortunate man observes, all in the front row, and Hernando is quite proud to see your little boy in his first real combat. To what Saya adds that his opponent looks strong and stable, handling the sword incredibly, although it is not yet a failure, so he wonders if the Prota, it will really be fine. And before that Hernando just smile, asking him to watch the movements of the Prota very well, as soon as he starts to fight, was that he has nothing to worry about. And here they explain that among all ranks, what can be given to a magician in the magic tower, the title of Great Sorcerer, is one of the most important of all, for it is only granted to those who has obtained a magic of origin that would become something with what you are only born with. Well, among the original magics is the revealing magic of the destination that allows take a look at the fate of the world, and that only Hernando possesses. This ability allows him to do many things, including winning at any game of chance, and that's exactly why weeks ago, when he was beaten by a game for the first time by none other than the Prota, knew something strange was going on. No matter how much the Prota saw, could not read or predict anything about their destination, and in their place, had a strange vision of Yuri as an adult, fighting with a superhuman determination that left him paralyzed, being the determination of someone that has complete control about its destiny, and from that moment on, began to keep a close eye on him, until he thought Yuri was destined. The odds are infinite, and the final decision is only in their hands. That is why I am sure to ask Sant to observe it closely before to worry about, and just Yuri asks him to your opponent to stop moving your sword and fight, and with that let them know who is ready to fight, and his opponent as well gives the signal, so Fior officially begins the combat trial. And not a single second goes by when the Prota throws himself at him, paralyzing him before his superhuman speed. The most impressive thing is that Yuri does not hesitate to use his mana method, so it barely achieves block it, and it needs some time. While getting used to the battle style little by little, the situation becomes more equable, but the shadow arrives when the Prota finally walks away, washing with pride the wound on his opponent's face, who remains on guard at all times. Fior remains and asks Hernando what he thinks it will be, the result to which it limits itself to thinking a little more about it, flipping in the moment, just to see the other guy counterattack with a burst that finally reaches the Prota. drawing a lot of blood. Yet Yuri does not hesitate to respond with the same intensity. For what Hernando must admit and does not know it, and the king asks him if it is true that his arrival at Briol's was guided by the gods. And the boy replies that yes, but you have nothing to worry about him leaving, because it still has a lot of work to do in that place. And still worry the king asks him again if there will be any injured or something serious will happen in this combat thing that Hernando answers with another question. Who do you think is stronger? Without hesitation Fior responds that Yuri is not on the level of the other guy, or at least in terms of strength. Something Hernando agrees on just a little bit. And thinks he did indeed come to that kingdom by the celestial signs, as these showed him that the strongest people of the continent, the person capable of change, the fate of the world was here. All that time he thought he was referring to Fior, and that to be living that era of peace it was not necessary for him to stay. However, the situation has changed, and just by looking at the Protet is sure that this is not yet the time for it. The other boy attacks, but instead of reacting as before, Yuri waits patiently for you in place before. Definitely his method of mana and attack using the founder's technique no longer needs to test the terrain. Seeing moment is going to end the battle and does so by moving forward, a speed superhuman to place the blade of his sword against the enemy's neck. Automatically the poor boy is sure he is going to die, and everyone present thinks the same, being completely paralyzed. But at that the Prota stops, and the other boy can only admit his defeat. And while everyone celebrates with joy, Hernando stands up thinking that came here for the heavenly signs, and finally met the person who challenges them all every day. And at that moment life turned into death, and death in life. Thank you. The boy who with a single sword changed his destiny and the MS forever, and understands that the people he was looking for was indeed there. Yuri Brioli, the one who transcends destiny. After that we have a temporary jump of 5 whole years, in which we see it, Lin's Maw, running desperately through the corridors of the Laver Palace, confused with its area assigned, and at that he comes face to face with Jack, the second prince, whom he asks what he is doing in that place, and just by looking at their features the girl knows she is. Which means you must be very careful. Con Loc Des, also because of his age and attitude he knows that it is not the heir nor the last child, but the one in the middle, known for his sinister eyes and overbearing attitude. So he does what his superiors recommended, ignore him. Which unfortunately only serves to make him angry, even more fortunately saved by the Protat, that the boy instantly recognizes, as it is well known and respected among workers, and he takes it upon himself to scare away his brother, in an instant, to the point where the girl gives him some cookies to save her. And now what is truly interesting is Kunosolo has grown in size but also as a warrior reaching the state so Kyun, where you are able to use the Ana to reduce your hand pressure by holding a sword, basically increasing its agility, and by that point, is already years old and has been almost half a decade since returning in time. Which means that the beginning of the war against the Empire is closer than ever, and peaceful days are about to end, and that is even clearer to him when there is a knock on the door of the living room of meetings and no one listens to it because they are too busy panicking and yelling at each other. So he decides to help from covering his fist with mana and then send the door flying and entering once and for all. Although it seems nobody is crazy, the shadow, and this is how the meeting comes together, where those present insist that they do not have troops available to send allied forces. They will have to ignore the application that made them the Empire. Let's remember that until now they are supposed to be allies, but he insists that other nobles will be in charge of sending more men, and Yuri thinks that they are very selfish and that they are only think in their own interests. But this event is very important and also occurred in his past life when the Empire sent them and other nations an expedition to join the Great Alliance, with which would launch a major offensive against the orcs in the east. The problem is that on that occasion, Field NS witnessed the orcs away, everything hanging the borders of all nations. Participants, the particularity that the only ones who did not attack afar, everything about the alliance was nothing more than a trap that the Empire armed together with the orcs, and the worst thing is that at that time, lost some of their best reinforcements, such as Liam, one of those present, weakening them enormously. That is precisely why the Protet does not allow any of this to happen. The cries of the nobles just tell them to shut up, insisting that he will join the forces, allies, and that they too must comply with their duty as nobles, so that the name of Briol not be tainted in response to his father. Just smile, recognizing, which is a very risky but interesting move. And after that Yuri spends the whole afternoon training until Jack arrives like crazy, asking him why he will join the allied forces, when as a member of he has no reason to take a light risk. However, the Prota tells him that just because he is it is your duty to lead by example, to which his brother insists that then, good luck over there. And in the meantime he will be in charge of protecting the palace, or anything that does not involve risk of death, and in the end he just leaves, and the main character asks his teacher if he is not worried about him, but this one says he doubts that he is going to die so easily, and that you should be able to come back in one piece. If that is not reckless, you should be careful, because the orcs are far from fighting like any human being, are stronger and more ruthless than they seem. Must also especially beware of those who carry flags on their backs, because that is the mark of the orcs that stand out among the orcs for its brutality, to which the prota tells him that he has a plan, but he doesn't get to tell her, because at that moment Emma appears, that he has a visit with a very special package. With that in mind goes to his personal office, where I was already being for Goryeo were good. That seems to, because he is actually a new character, named Guillermo, who works as a personal assistant, line, and as it is on a business trip, has come in its place. Automatically, Yuri asks me to tell him to take things easy. But it seems that women cannot go a single day without war, and could not let it pass either. Only one day without giving him the last and most important one. Order a chest full of decorative daggers. Called elementarium at first glance look like normal weapons. However, the protect, which are extremely valuable as they are, imbued with ancient magic, and you just need to put a little mana to start moving on their own. Automatically the protect gives you a taste of what you can do with them, and in that you notice something very strange, moving in a corner of the room. But he doesn't give it much importance and dispatches Guillermo, visiting him for his plan and headquarters, put in the Empire. The interesting thing comes when they are left alone out of nowhere. Says can come out, revealing that the mysterious movement of the past was the work of Healthy, who after all did become a murderer in the service of the protect. That is why, without wasting any more time, informs him that he did just what he asked of him and issued a warning note in the top of the bed of Goryeo to keep his place and stop trying to fuck with the rest of the merchants in the kingdom. Also asks him if he is really going to join the mission against orcs, insisting that you should be careful. However, Yuri clarifies that she will not go alone and secretly with him and make sure everything goes well. And despite being a murderer, Mort the girl blushes, adding that he will always be there for himself. And after that they pass a few days until it is time to leave, and Cedric puts his work aside to say goodbye to the prota properly, who tells him that he will be sure to leave. The name of the cold ones is very high, and after a couple of jokes, embrace and are interrupted by their father, who initiates the appointment ceremony, where he makes it clear that the prota has been left as the person in charge, not only of his own life, but of all the troops of the kingdom for this mission. That's why he tells him, who in the change of battle must think about lives, valuable things he carries on his shoulders. Although the prota believes that he cannot guarantee that he will only, unharmed and now at least, will ensure that they do not die, miserable as in the other timeline. Once his father asks him if he could do so, and the prota asks him if he could do so, he says yes, but before he could finish the phrase, Fior attacks him with a strong wave of murderous intentions, transmitting an aura so powerful that it leaves him completely paralyzed. And despite being his own father, his own body tells him, instinctive, that what is found in front of him is death itself. Will die if he does anything. Will die if he does nothing. He will die if he tries. Beat it and either it will die. However, unlike last time, can now respond and activates its own mana, gaining enough strength to draw his sword and stop his father's attack, passing the last test before being able to go to the, and without more Fior congratulates him by insisting that it is his form to bid him farewell. And now all he can say is back alive. And so it is a moment to talk about what to stop in front of the grandmother, introducing himself as Yuri, the third prince of Fior, and them that they can trust him. So it's time, and in a change of scene we moved on to a dungeon. Apparently empty. However, one of the Tims is fought an orc, and in front of him the who is looking forward to it, to meet the prota again and talking about the devil. Yuri and the other soldiers of Briol take a short break to rest halfway along the way, and although it seemed that they were a long way from going to get there, are actually along the boundaries of the territory, fewer, and after that, the goal is to survive. Jid to get to Valsach, and a hero named Raymond, who knows the area very well, tells him that they are going at a very good pace. However, everything goes to hell when a voice is behind him, says in a sinister voice that it was all his fault. Lauren was the first to sacrifice his life for him, and the last face he saw before of being a hero in his past life. The detail is that they currently Lauren is alive and kicking and kneeling before him, presenting himself as the son of one of the nobles, but also confessing how much he admires him, since he heard what he did in combat 5 years ago. Basically became his grandfather, and he, living sample of the code that should follow. Everything costs for what he is happy to serve him, and the prota tries to maintain sanity by being saved by Raymond, who insists that it is time to continue. And at that point he warns the star that the decorator is not known for his kindness, so personal should not be taken in if they are to be received in the coldest possible way, something Yuri already knows. And that's why they all end up surprised when they are greeted by a giant letter with letters, "Welcome, third prince." Not only that, but all the heroes in the area await them by showing the highest honors. Among them is the decorator himself, insisting on how much he admires him for voluntarily joining the front at such a young age, and also asks him if he already has experience fighting against the orcs, and the prota says that of course, until he realizes that in this life it does not, and disguises, saying that he has learned a lot and that he counts with the support of its troops who have been in battle several times. Sorprendente, that does not discourage you, if not quite the opposite, and continues to smile Aang, who has a gig that you might like, and in that way the guides Ellie and some of his men closer to a room in the dar, where everything seems normal, until he puts on a padlock, and Yuri panics, asking for an explanation of what the fuck he intends to do, and super calmer tells them they have nothing to worry about, and turns on the torches, revealing the orc to them as he explains to them who took him prisoner to study him and to learn as much as possible about this species, from its habits to its instincts. Basically any data they can use against them. However, more than a prisoner is now the gift he has for the prota. The best way so that you can practice and prepare for what is to come, to which the prota thanks him. Although inside he thinks he's crazier than I thought, no matter what. The madman is right, and when he saw that one of his men seems to be about to go to the bathroom of fear, asks him what he is thinking, and the boy is honest, replying that I didn't think they would have to come so far away, and that it feels as if it is doing something terrible against a prisoner of war. Yuri understands it, and just that asks Powder to open the cage, releasing the orcs so that the boy can have a battle one-on-one, and although he used to be scared to death, that calms him down. Remaining in guard waiting for the enemy's first movement, the surprise comes when from the nothing the orc begins to scream and hit his own face against the ground, again and again, giving the impression that he had lost his mind due to the torture. In fact, right there the boy turns around, and insisting that he will not fight a prisoner. Defenseless, but not a second goes by, until the orc lunges at him from behind, hitting his head with such intensity that definitely I would have known it had it not been for him helmet. But that's not the end of the story. The orc also takes him hostage, and everyone is preparing to fight what has been asks them to calm down because his tendons have already been cut, and he does not pose a threat. What it does represent is a sample of what they actually face. So the prota approaches, telling him that it is a brutal creature, intelligent and ruthless. What he sees there is an orc. And to make its point even clearer, send to a failure named Corey, who translates the orc's words, asks him to put his weapons down right now, or break his bones one by one. In response, the prota only asks Hernando to do his thing, and he conjures up a love magic with which it manages to paralyze the creature temporarily. Takes the opportunity to save the boy in a matter of seconds, and of course the orc doesn't take it well at all, and begins to scream while imitates an aura. Scary, and Yuri realizes that he is no ordinary orc. What Sitter confirms by revealing that when he was found, was eating a corpse alive. Those simple words are enough for the subordinates of the prota want to return him. Sorry, however, Yuri orders her to remain calm, for the rest of the cells are filled with others like him, and everyone is waiting for the moment to attack. Can also be assured that there will be worse on the. So the priority here is to take advantage of training and learn to kill orcs, and thus begins an organized battle against the creature, with Hernando protecting Yuri, and so on. Total disaster, while Cobbs are led and the others. They attack one by one. And in this way, every time they manage to defeat one, the next one attacks, and in case they are about to be injured, the prota, they die, accumulating them with swords made of pure mana. Practically one of the boys only realize their own weakness, but the prota insists that this experience has just increased its odds off at least a little more, and fewer adds that even though keeping them locked up here is a move dirty, these creatures do not deserve any gesture of chivalry, and once they finish he asks them to follow him, for them to see a sample of what orcs are really doing, and reveals a multitude full of much smaller and weaker creatures, orcs, and that among orcs and humans would be result of all the humans that beasts have kidnapped for its own reflection. The idea is so horrible that one of the guys almost vomits, and Fuhrer takes the opportunity to make it clear who hates those beings and will remain so until the day of his death. Yuri understands that in this world everyone has their own archenemies, and while for him the worst of evils is the Empire, but for Fuhrer, orcs who have raised their people and their own son to the ground. And the next day the Count asks him to take Corey, with them revealing that the boy is a half-orc, willing to collaborate, and the prota accepts by treating him directly as one of their own, and then prepare to cross the border. An area known for its instabilities caused in part by orcs, but mainly by bandits. So they have to prepare because this is just beginning. And that becomes even clearer when in a change of scene, we see a small sample of the massacre caused by the deadliest bandit in the area. And as for the these, advance with caution, while thinking how he will keep things calm. Once the members of the platoon realize that Tori is half-orc, and in the end decides that he will leave that in Hermando's hands and asks Jared to take charge of it, of the recognition of the areas that, although they belong to the bandits and the original plan was to them, and he already thinks it will be best to place them to take advantage of and eliminate two birds from a shot at the beginning. Jared has his doubts, but after a couple of compliments, gets down to work, so Raymond can't help but note that the prota has a lot of price for it, and Yuri insists that he only takes it with him because it is useful, and instead take the opportunity to ask why he is fighting, stunning him since he can't even remember last time someone like it. Something similar. However, he insists that his answer is simple, and at the same time simple. Complex fight for the safety of Briol. What is feels for that. The main authority decides that he may be able to leave him in charge as long as he joins Jared thanks to that they get with the bandit camp and gets neutralize one of them, which he was also doing. Recognition were confessing that he is a rookie and that he was sent alone, but the protag. What attracts his attention is the necklace on his neck, made with a bright red glass. What a simple rookie. I shouldn't even be able to. Luckily the boy is willing to talk, explaining that it was handed over to him by his boss, who gave them strict orders to use it while on patrol. He doesn't know if he has embedded magic or anything else, so he doesn't know if he has embedded magic. Yuri understands, which is something you'll have to figure out for yourself, and in this way is in charge of monitoring the bandits nearby while Caird mobilizes its troops, and once he is sure they have it, does what he does alone. A madman like he would attack head-on, arriving at the center of the enemy camp, where he begins to scream and destroy everything in his path. Azerbaijan pulls some poor people out of its tents, and, with confidence, presents himself as the one who will give them the beating of their lives, and a while later Jared and the others arrive at the camp, but it is too late. The only one standing is the protag. I was already waiting for it with peace of mind, explaining that no one escaped, they were all annihilated, and has plenty of meat that they can steal to have a good feast before arrival. To that, the whole situation is so surreal that Jared is not even sure to start eating, and at that we see that the leader of the bandits was also defeated, humiliated to such a level that they do not even dedicate to him a panel, and even though it tries to stand up, Yuri puts it in its place. While Raymond explains that before reaching the point, meeting of the allied forces will encounter the army of the famous Holy Kingdom. They are known to use magic, and the protag wonders if he could count on his skills. Decoration, but Raymond is not sure since on that occasion, the commander will be the very princess of the kingdom, Sacred, who finds himself in the midst of a power struggle, intense, very complex, and rumors say he will use that war as a way of demonstrating their power. Is completely and will do anything to make all its people come out alive, of that including sacrificing to anyone who gets in his way. That leaves the thinking about what they should do, and even though Raymond excels in investigating a little more, Yuri insists he'd better fix that in the simplest way possible by talking to her directly. With that in mind, continue to the region, independent guide that would be the last stop before Balsac, and an area with very strict military laws, so that even as allied soldiers any mistake could end up with them in jail. And while the others set up camp on the Yuri meets with Mr. Gid, who presents himself as quite formal and friendly, insisting that he support them in everything he can. Also mentions that his father called great advances against orcs in their time, so you expect a lot from him, and that's when things start to turn in favor of the protag. For the darkness of the kingdom, Sacred also arrives at the palace, introducing herself as Sylvia. Arsank. The curious thing is that similar to Yuri, she is not the heir, but the second one dies, but that's where it ends. The similarities then, to see the protagonist sitting down quite naturally, asks him if he is a vassal of the lord, ordering him to remove from the room so that they can discuss issues important at that time. Yuri says nothing, and although the gentleman tries to clarifying the misunderstanding, does not give him time to say anything, because it goes to the fuck when one of the woman soldiers starts yelling at him for not getting up before arrival of His Majesty. There the Protasis is presented as the third prince of Boreal, playing the ice cream in their places and dipping up the room. A profound silence that only breaks down, explaining that he is in charge of the command of these troops. That does tell them that they do not have to worry about being confused, and everyone gets used to it by lightening things up. After that, the three of them sit down to have tea, and the boys present themselves adequately, with Yuri insisting that they are practically the same age, and they should be friends more than anything, to leave aside all formalities before it is time to fight side by side against the orcs. And even though confused, she accepts, and that is where they begin to talk of what is truly important, since she explains that he went ahead and that his troops should be arriving here tomorrow morning. To which Yuri tells him that hopefully they can arrive on time, and nothing bad happens to them. That confuses it, asking if anything. He doubts the loyalty of his people, but he explains that it did not refer to an internal conflict, but to an external, that the orcs decide to risk appearing inside of the limits for ambush them, or something like that. Sounds exaggerated, but not impossible. So while he does not doubt that his subordinates are strong, expects to be taken into account. And after that he meets with Hernando, who asks him what the champions of the kingdom were like. Secret, and Yuri tells them that very tense because of what they have. The feeling that Sylvia is going to have a bad time. However, now the important thing is the necklace of the bandits that allegedly purchased in the main gold market. And according to the capital of bandits, has the property of attracting orcs as if it were some kind of drug. And when they explain all that to the vendors, they send them to fuck with someone else. Because they insist that something like this does not exist, and they are about to return to the camp until they notice that their men are entering. How to call a case in a clandestine, so they decide, go with them to bed a little. And of course put them in their place. And on the other hand, Sylvia also leaves the palace and meets with Vanek, the vice commander of the Sacred Kingdom, who soon speaks ill of the Pertat, insisting that whoever sent that a soul to command is proof that the kingdom of Briol is in decline. Automatically, she tells him that there is no need to judge him ahead of time, but the guy goes on and on, pointing out that he dresses like a mercenary, and he won, and he has no doubt that after that war, will be back in a coffin and tired. Sylvia insists that it has been enough, and following the advice of the Pertat, asks him if there is a problem with the troops on their way, to which he tells her that he has everything under control, and that you have nothing to worry about. Of course, all with one face. That it should definitely, and will only be on patrol, leaving her with the feeling that he does not respect her at all. And after that Ifana and his men arrive at the casino where the soldiers of the Briol playing cards well relaxed. And he gets crazy, yelling at them that he should show more respect than they are. Undisciplined people taking the Allied forces as a joke and blah blah blah. Continuing with his madness. Until someone puts their hand on it. In the desert, being Yuri. Who asks him who he is and what the fuck he's doing. Of course, Vanek recognizes him and withdraws his hand with. Continuing with the drama that this relaxed attitude not only moves him, but also to his men who should focus on swords, not cards. Besides understanding that they have never really fought, to which Yuri asks him again who he is. Because no one can dare to discipline to a prince, and that leaves the unfortunate speechless, and the best thing is that Sylvia appears right there, insisting that he should be patrolling the site to look for problems, and then order him to leave right now. And in the process it remains clearer than Vanek despises her, but she ignores him and apologizes, with Yuri who understands that it is very difficult to maintain all subordinates under control, and this issue makes her feel so uncomfortable that she just retreats. And that's where Yuri recalls Raymond's words that the phone is in a very weak position in the struggle for the power of the kingdom, and the disdain of its people as it. Vanek is proof of this. Yet it is not your problem, and asks the kids to prepare for the next round. At the same time that it confronts Sylvia, asking him if it was done. Friend of the Prince Briolate. Ordinary and inelegant, that will definitely lead to defeat in that war. However, just as Sylvia was about to respond, are interrupted by the arrival of a messenger soldier, calling them completely desperate because brings urgent news from the main troops. And it is that just at that moment, are being attacked by orcs, and without wasting time, Sylvia stands to go into battle. To which Mr. Gid intercepts it, proposing that they ask for help to the people of Briol, as this would only minimize casualties for their people and damage to the Allied forces, and although it is most logical to, Vanek responds by Sylvia, insisting that it is, because the kingdom sacred will take care of its own affairs, as they have always done, asking him if he doubts that they will win against some poor orcs. The worst thing is that Sylvia seems agree with him, saying he is grateful for your concern, but definitely, they can deal with that, and in the end they just leave, and Mr. Gid recognizes that they are bastards. However, he cannot let them die, so he asks his ally to meet with Yuri and Briol's troops. There is no time to waste where they will face a massacre. That's how in a couple of minutes the main objective is to receive the message, including the fact that Mr. Gid asks them personally to intercede, what surprises Raymond, because it is silly that he had to give the order, and not the same affected of the Sacred Kingdom, of course. Yuri can imagine what that was due to, so gives the order to prepare them to leave the few soldiers left in the camp, while sending that subordinate guy to look for the rest of the assholes who stayed behind, drinking at the casino. And it seems that the time has come to give a small night walk. And after that they get in motion where jokes with Jared telling him he looks pretty good for someone so drunk, and Lauren take the opportunity to tell him how impressed he is that he not only forgives the bastards who insulted him, but did not hesitate for a second to extend a hand to save them. And it is obvious that this is something that a true hero does, and even though the main character, thanks AM, can't stop thinking about how much the blonde guy has changed compared to his past life. At the beginning, seems crazy, but now he understands that just as his actions have had an influence in general events, it makes sense that this also translates in a direct change for people. However, any thought takes a back seat. when finally you can see those of the kingdom, sacred fighting at a distance, and Yuri asks for attention. This is the first battle they will have, against orcs, as a unit, so it must stick together and remember. From now on he will be the first to enter, to the and the last. And leaving has no intention of losing anyone, so that while covers his body, and that of his own horse, and Mana orders them to make it out alive. As it results, however, before seeing it 100% in action, we go back a few minutes in time. Just at the moment when Sylvia and Herman had not even arrived yet, to the and she acknowledges how careless she was in trusting herself and not having taken into account the Proto's warnings about the dirty tricks that orcs can use, in that they finally get to see the battle from a distance and notice that the troops of the kingdom still standing, so they rush to catch up with them by ordering the Fanmake to launch head-on. The plan is to attack the enemy commander at once. Fortunately, the latter does not question it and leads his men on the attack while she's her mana method. His horse, in a very powerful white aura, which allows you to increase speed at a pace. Impressive. The problem is that it is because of this that they do not realize it, that in front of them it is but a skull. That by recognizing that it has them within its ring, activates a circle that destroys the soil throughout the area by making them fall straight into a trap of which will not be easy to come out alive. And in the midst of despair, Sylvia begins to remember his life. Specifically when he awakened the sacred magic, not only a little girl, and praised her, so much so that he tried to live up to their expectations. In fact, he succeeded and even managed to defeat his brother in fencing. However, that ended up being the worst mistake of his life, for when she saw how powerful the threat she posed was, her brother began to push her away, pushing it onto this, so that he could never accede to the throne. Of course, what his brother and everyone in the palace is really waiting for him to die and after fall to the ground without being able to move. Sylvie reconfirmed that this alleged honor given to him is nothing more than a death sentence. That's why he has tried so hard to survive so far, and that is why he has to go on living. So it brings together all the strength he has left to stand up, ordering his men not to stop fighting. And the nightmare comes when he feels a liquid substance in his hands, but instead of blood, notice that it is oil, and when he looks up, are surrounded by dozens of orcs holding torches. Clearly did not fall into an ordinary trap, but in a giant oven. And the plan of the unfortunate is to burn them alive, a strategy ruthless but very intelligent, that added to the ambush of Asura finally makes it clear that they are not facing just any enemies. Orcs have the intelligence of humans and evil of a demon, and desperately trying to find a way out. Until it is given, realizes that there is no way for it to come out of it and closes eyes waiting for death. To the amazement that the only thing he hears is the voice of the main character asking him to open his eyes. And at that moment he sees the orc's head flying through the air, and Yuri asks him if he is. It was so hard to ask him help and if it is good enough to keep on fighting. After that he pulls her out of there and admits he owes him one, but it's no problem for him. And while his men are in charge of annihilating the enemies, Finnick approaches him apologizing for his former attitude, and admits that he never will forget what he has just done for them. With a smile, Yuri accepts, insisting that he only hopes to be covered back when the time comes. But even though the battle seems to be more balanced, everything changes when one of the orcs gives the signal. The bastards decide to withdraw when they see that they will no longer be able to annihilate them with dirty tricks. Automatically the Proto orders them not to be allowed to go, and begins to pursue them, until one of the orcs decides to stay to stop them from being nothing more and nothing less than a fair orbal, the kind of enemy that is supposed to avoid, and Prince Yuri is left paralyzed in an apparent show of weakness. But when the orbal fires a mana-powered arrow, the Proto stops her using only his sword, making it clear to him that this is not over, and that it is willing to respond to its challenge with all that it has. However, nor is she willing to wait patiently for Lord Bull attacks, so still with enemies in sight, goes his mana method and throws himself against them, completely alone. And when one of the strongest orcs saw him, tries to stop him by throwing a spear at such a speed that in a matter of seconds, arrives right in front of the star's face, almost impacting against this. But that's the key word, almost, because Yuri recalls one of the most important concepts taught to him by his teacher, and it is that while under normal conditions, the key is to train to meet conditions unexpected. Your mana method allows you to capture instantly any situation around it to the point of identifying intuitively the most optimal way at every opportunity. In a nutshell, the founder's technique will lead in the right direction, not only to avoid danger, but to show him the path that will allow him to take down the enemy as efficiently as possible. And to make it even simpler, is a kind of sense arachnid that back to the present allows him to dodge the spear even the millimeters away from impacting his face, and also moves his body automatically to annihilate a group of orcs from a single movement. However, the battle just beginning, and by identifying it as the main threat, The others launch against him in batches of 3 against those it would normally have all the disadvantages, and it would be a complete fool by wanting to face them head on. The difference now is that it is reasoning with his ability like never before, and it has been so long since the last time he was in a real battle that there is no way to waste that opportunity. And out of nowhere he is even able to see the patterns of where should cut to eliminate its enemy, being the most optimal way of the sword, so he doesn't even think about it before attacking, eliminating one by one all the orcs who make the sad mistake. To face it, yes, Yuri notices that it is slowing down, for his body is not yet able to continue the rhythm of his thoughts. But nothing like that it matters, because by the time you turn to see around him, almost all the orcs have been defeated. And the only one left standing is Orbital, to whom defied a duel by throwing his spear at him in the same way in which it did so in the past. Of course, Orbital manages to protect itself, acting in a very confident manner, to the provocations of the Prota, to which Yuri just smiles, because that attack was not for him, but for something right behind his back. And at that moment the flag of Orbital falls, and the orcs, still alive, can't believe what they see, being completely paralyzed at the sight of that someone has arrived who can stand up to their leader. In fact, they no longer run away or fight, being so surprised, who do not know what to do to what the troops came out of, to take advantage of them to start attacking. And at that time Sylvia asks the Prota if he is well, and with a smile, he says he could be better off, seeing how his men take advantage, annihilating some of them by scaring away the rest, and in short, winning the championship. And there he asks him how his first victory feels as part of the Allied forces, and Sylvia admits it's superb, but he does not hesitate to thank you, because if they are alive, is thanks to him. And on the other hand, in a change of scene we see that Rubal was one of those who managed to escape, and is already facing defeat, implying that it will definitely will take revenge, and back to the city of Kidgareth soon, and gathering the few rookies left at the telling them excited every single detail of the last battle, and leaves them very, because I had the impression that Yuri, it really wasn't that strong, and that he was just a bum spending crown money. In bedding, Lauren automatically goes out to defend her husband, insisting that they are pure unfounded lies. And with an intoxicated look, we don't know if it's because of the bear or his devotion to the Prota, claiming that he is the strongest of the real line, and has a long list. There are reasons that I will gladly tell you. What they do not know is that apart from the sick people who stop to listen to it, are also being observed by Asana, who thinks that Yuri, definitely not an ordinary nobleman, is a guy who believed in his ability to murder, and even before it has been fully developed. And no matter the situation, always seems to be several steps ahead of his opponent, and although it sounds ridiculous, sometimes he thinks he sees the future. However, the important thing comes when he tells you the inn owner, who is looking for a person, dark brown hair, always carries a sword around his waist, and the more delicate trait is not very good at language. Continental, so it probably has an accent. And after thinking about it, this tells him that he remembers someone with a strange accent, which he asked for risotto, without any kind of spices, and we ask him how to get to. With all such information, that is more than enough for Sarah, so he thanks him with a silver coin. Thinking he has no doubts, the person looking for is on his way to the point meeting of the Allied forces, the same place headed by Yuri. That means you'll have to get a little ahead of yourself and look for it, as this is the following piece in the chess of the Prota, the swordsman of this one of the 10 strongest of the entire continent. As for Yuri, the next day they continue on their way, taking as an example the experience of the Sacred Kingdom to set traps and fences before camping for the night. And everyone works so fast, who does not hesitate to thank Raymond for guide them in such tasks. And after that, the surrounding area will be monitored. I would like to imagine as many scenarios as possible of some ambush, but in that case it is find a horrible Chorus scene, being beaten by his own allies who call him spies and harass brutally until Yuri ended up ordering them to get out of here before I end up doing something. What he later regrets, and in the end, the only one left is Corey, that although he thanks him, asks him not to be too hard on them, because even certain point understands where all the hatred they have for him comes from. Also, if you let him intervene for something so small, he will only get further away from his dream. That attracts the attention of the Prota to what Corey confesses that what he loves the most is to do a good job, so that in time, allow him to live among humans, which Yuri, it is very difficult. For the only reason by which he is allowed to remain among the soldiers is his function is as a translator. Once it is over, that mission will put his future completely up in the air, but does not dare to discourage him, and it instead recommends that it remain. No booking to learn magic, for you will need some skill if you want to live among people. And after that they both return to camp already finished, and Yuri meets Raymond, Jared and Hernando to make sure you discard any possible scenario in which they are ambushed. Wall thinks he is exaggerating a bit, however, the Prota insists that it is the least they can do, as they are currently in the territory of the orcs and the geese. That enemies attack are in fact so high that just at that moment, a messenger enters the store shouting that they are under attack, and when they come out, face the worst chance. A direct attack with palm fire, and the most impressive dark mana techniques. Also known as witchcraft. And analyzing the situation, Hernando explains that probably will not have a sorcerer in their ranks, but are launching witchcraft bombs, prefabricated, so they must have. To those who throw them, the prota keeps calm, ordering to deploy the ranks while he will search the mine. I need this madness to fix things in person. And so without wasting time, he asks Hernando from which direction the sorceress comes, and he points the finger at this so it wraps its body in mana to increase power and run away at full speed, and notices a red flag flaring, tied to Orbal's sword. And that is where he realizes that it is the same Orbal from before, who has clearly come to seek revenge. So it is given to him, launching himself against him in an attack, which unfortunately is blocked by the giant, and then respond with a flurry of blows so brutal that they force, and once they both stop to breathe, realizes that his arm right is trembling from the effort, and fear begins to invade his body, for the enemy's movements are not those of a normal or not even from an orc Va. Being the commander with a lot of combat experience, and although he does not like the turn that things have taken, must continue to fight, thinks the best thing he can do is to increase the distance between them, and takes advantage of the constant attacks of the enemy to dodge and move away, centimeter by centimeter. At first glance it would appear Orbital is in full control of the battle, but their desperation contrasts with Yuri's calmness that after blocking another blow, attacks by overcoming all previous attempts with a single stroke, and once understands, which is at a completely different level. However, he also activates his Nana method and once again lashes out at everything he has, willing to prove what that big bastard is capable of. Practically better. Who would have thought of that, since out of nowhere, Orbal lets out his own ace under the sleeve, a kind of mana never before Beza for the Pertat, not being sure if it is witchcraft, but you may feel that it involves an energy of a ridiculously dark nature, with such an imposing, scary aura, and as soon as the Prota is clearly surprised, because the orcs do not control mana. But considering that Hernando confirmed the presence of a sorcerer, and that they have proven to be capable of developing strategies complex, understands that he was deluded in not considering that possibility. The thing is that instead of worrying, he gets excited and smiles blatantly before the challenge it represents. Fight one of the strongest orcs of the enemy army. That also means that you will have to struggle with everything. So it activates the technique of separation of souls that automatically shows you a lot of lines on the body of the Orbal, lines that in this case are diffuse because of how difficult it is to him, and that border in a single point. His left eye on that Lord Vok attacked again. However, the Prota already knows what he has to do, and is carried away by the path of the sword until the tip buckle around the enemy's neck, and in a movement that should have won the victory of not being, because he is so strong that he takes the sword with his hand and removes it as if nothing had happened, would have happened. And as for the wound of the neck, was in charge of reinforcing it with Anna to minimize damage, and to the surprise of the Prota only mocks him as a victory. Fortunately, Yuri has no doubts and power his sword to get it out of there by cutting off several fingers at that Orbal responds with an axe straight to his cell, that apart from blood, it brings a smile to his face, recognizing that mediocre attacks will not be enough to take down the bastard, and without time, no energy to lose, his put back into position. And the Orbal responds with the same intensity until both of them attack and collide, generating a large explosion of pure mana which can be seen from miles away, until with the passage of the seconds, dissipates, leaving behind a hole in the floor, arrested for the remains of a weapon. Fortunately, it is clear that it is the weapon of the Orbal that falls to the ground, in the relentless sight of Yuri, who does not hesitate for a second before taking his own sword and give the final blow, and it is so with a stab wound straight in the mirror defeats him, but not even that is enough to take his life, and in the middle of a pool of blood, the warrior keeps trying to move, continues to try to attack, and at the beginning the Pertat, it is said that I should kill him, but then remember who surely has more information than anyone for what would be a waste, take his life, and in that Jared and the others come to the scene asking him if he is okay. However, the Pertat, the only thing that matters is the state of the camp, and only reassures himself when he confirms that everyone is well, so he gives the order to round up the survivors, including this one he has just defeated, has quite a few questions to do, and with that in mind, once things calm down and they set up camp again, Hernando is in charge of healing the main character's wounds, but not without to mock a little that even someone like him can see them. Bad in a battle, of course, is not as serious and looked as good as new. So before I can get started, the interrogation commands to bring a great ostentatious and rather ridiculous throne, insisting that a commander like him should to sit on something. And one of his soldiers offered to build it, just for himself. At the beginning, the expression of the Protect, it's pure horror, but even he can't help but smile, to be moved by the idea of instilling respect for the good. So how rude would it be? Rejected is felt to appreciate the fine finishes of the throne before which will officially begin with the interrogation of the prisoners, and at that moment, that we realize that all this time had been being watched by the surviving orcs. They look at me with an expression of pure hate, and they obviously refuse to talk, so they begin to torture them, burning the face of anyone who does not respond to each of your questions. That's why Yuri warns them that they will only have an opportunity to respond with the truth, and ask who was responsible for ordering her search every night, to which the orc who was interrogating begins to let out a lot of shouts that before Pori can translate them already knows that these are pure insults, and without hesitation he gives the signal to Jared, and Jared, she leaves aside the playful appearance she always has, to look at it seriously by taking the rope that has tied her neck to get her head into the flames. In a series of screams that resonate throughout the forest, and despite being an orc the scene is so cloudy that everyone is paralyzed, but no one is. Doubt, and the orc continues to twist on the ground, while you flame them advance through your body, and once again Yuri warns them that he will only ask them once each, and depending on the response, will consider or will not free them from their pain, and then take one of the daggers infused with mana, and uses them to stab the orc's heart, taking his life in a matter of seconds, and asks Jared to push the body to one side, so that they can continue with the interrogation, and out of nowhere another of those present decides to talk, revealing that they know nothing, because they are all soldiers, but the one who gave the order to divert to attack them was Rockwold, so he should spare the lives of the rest, and punish the unfortunate person instead. Automatically Yuri laughs, not because he has been betrayed, but because he knows it's not as simple as that. Decides to be a little more direct, asking them if this attack was ordered by a certain Okwa, a name that doesn't make much sense to your men. To the point where they look at each other, completely confused. What they don't know is that Okwa is the name of the well-known king of the orcs up east, so strong, which is the main reason by which the alliance was founded in the first place, in addition to was responsible for eliminating to the majority of mayors of Real in his past life. So if they want to end this war, he is the one who must be eliminated at all costs. And for this point, Orbal asks if he will forgive him. If you respond honestly, the Prota says yes, but that's not enough, and asks him to take an oath, basically an unbreakable pact, where the two put their honor at stake. Yuri is, because that's not what I would expect from an orc, but he accepts, and Jared panics because there is no way that they can set free such a great threat as this one. Even so, the Proton insists that he has everything under control. Jorbal confirms that he received the order from his leader, Tribal, but that the initial idea was to goose that. If you do not know how they obtained the exact information of the routes to be taken by the Alliance, he is only certain that he discovered it and sent it there to intervene, and everything is so rare that even Jared responded by pointing out that it is too much of a coincidence. The worst thing is that this too would explain the ambush against the troops of the Holy Kingdom. But as a last question, and only one other thing, you need to know, how strong is Okwa, who is? Orbal smiles and laughing basically implies that he's screwed, for not even a dozen Orboks like him would have a chance against Okwa, who is stronger and faster than any other be of that world. A statement intimidating that Yuri does not deny. However, humans are much more, and that is clear when he shows you the famous red crystal from before. The Orbal automatically stands up and breaks the ties, as if I were desperate to snatch it, and then went against him, breaking any agreement. The thing is that Yuri doesn't even move because they have it. Ended up expressing to him that even if he dares to speak of honor, is unworthy of him, and plan to respect the oath. But now you can see that you don't deserve it, and gives the order to kill him, so that after eliminate him, and the rest of the orcs have the opportunity to put things on in the camp really in order, which implies begin to heal all the, and he is left as the main manager, the priest of Briel, German, but in that Hernando arrives to help him, followed by Corey, who is in charge of bringing him buckets and buckets of water that it purifies, converting it in holy water that is not only armored by God, but has properties. That's why he asks her to lend a hand by putting a little about the wounds of all, and Corey obeys without hesitation, being to watch for about a few seconds of that man's magic are capable of making people's faces to transmit a deep pain, a reflection of pure calm. And that is the moment in which he finally understands the Prote's advice. That could be him, could use their magic to help people, and after that they continue to work until dawn, and even though Durman only thinks the magician, Fernando does not let Corey's effort pass him by, noting that it also has merit. Practically see how they looked after an ambush that is not even part of the main battle leaves Germ with a very bad feeling to what Hermendo, I guess he doesn't think it's going to be that bad anymore, and asks him to look around. Because even though they have just passed for a very dangerous battle, they all came out alive and help each other. Some care, wounded, and others raise their spirits. In fact, he decides to play his part right there, emitting a ray of energy with which to fill the sky of Aurora Borealis and draws a smile on the faces of all present, including Corey, who takes the opportunity to ask him with his eyes, hopeful that please teach him magic that takes. Unsuspecting Hernando, admitting that it has been a long time since he heard that phrase, and asks him why he wants to learn magic, to what Cory confesses that he now understands that magic has the ability to make people smile, and that is what you most want to see in your future. And after a little thought about it, Hernando responds that a half-orc who masters magic sounds very cool, giving to understand that it is more than willing to take him on as an apprentice. However, the important arrives later, just when they are ready to get moving. Again, some heroes of the Empire come to visit them, asking for meet with Yuri before the official meeting of the Valsach Alliance, and the way they react, it seems that the prototype already expected it, welcoming an Imperial hero named Rol. This one is presented with respect when it is part of that, and that his team has already reached Valsach, but considering they have discovered the presence of groups of orcs in the surrounding area, decided to come and warn them so that they would not be able to take them by surprise. Yuri thanks him and asks who is the angel behind his back to what he is used to for not presenting adequately, however, is not in the most honorable position of his career. God will know what he means. The important thing is that the Proto recognizes it and considers it something ironic that they meet again in this way, more than anything else, considering that it is the symbol of the moment, darkest of its past. And at that moment the boy introduces himself as Graham, being the same one who in his other life spares his life of letting him escape ways that he had no reason to do so, and Graham explains that recently lost its championship title, but to Yuri could not care less, and insists that it is a pleasure, asking him if then is fighting in this war without possessing any title or rank any shameful. Graham confesses that he does to what Raul ended up saying he did nothing wrong, and that his only sin was to have the wrong mentor. But that is still not reason enough to ignore all that they have done by the Empire throughout his career, and although he does not say it out loud, the prototype, I could not agree more, considering him the man most just and affectionate person he has ever met, so he just insists that heard great things about him, and that if he would like to change of scenery, being able to offer you a place in the ranks of Briel, and in his mind all he can think is that although hates with all his soul the heroes of the Empire, knows he is different, that will surely pay a heavy price for leaving him, and wants to reward him even in that light. The problem is that without even thinking about it a little, Graham just refuses, and the Proto tells him that there is no problem, for a part of him was already waiting to say that, and in the end continues on its way as planned, until they arrive in the city of Valsach that turns out to be much larger than the Proto had imagined is, surrounded by a wall, super tall that was definitely built by the magicians, most talented of all. The interesting thing is that it barely crosses the entrance. Hernando warns him to be careful, because this place is full of people powerful that will devour him for mere pleasure, and Yuri assumes he is referring to the dude, imagining him as one of the typical old men, bitterness with which he has to deal from time to time. That's why the real surprise arrives when he meets the Duchess Arette movie called May Rose. That is not only impressively beautiful, but is also friendly, presenting himself before the star with great respect, and when he Pika, who is in charge of Briele's troops, evens with him a little bit, asking him how old he is, Yuri explains that she has just turned, to which she insists it is perfect, because he is only 4 years older than him, and the ration becomes more and more brazen, to the point at which the Proto finally understands that it is all that, and she is beautiful but also very intelligent. So he used that beauty to influence people. Practically the Proto, remember that it has very bad experience with this type of manipulation, to the point where he doesn't care whether their intentions are good or bad, is unable to see it in a positive light. That is why he tells her that age is not relevant. If two people share the same values, can become friends, regardless of age or gender origin, basically a form to ask him to put aside ridiculous games. Hint that she accepts very well and keeps going with protocol, presenting the protocol out of Bruce, together with those who will be fighting side by side very soon. And the interesting comes when he insists that they should do something to get to know each other better before the battle, and that attracts Hernando's attention, who expects me to be just a very sociable crazy woman, while Jared asks where the fuck is left Bruce on the map, and the Protat explains that it is of a very small country near the ocean, known for being firm and strong, and just at that moment, the commander in charge of the troops of the Bruce approaches to offer him a bottle of him, introducing himself as Jonathan, automatically insist to pour him a drink. And even though everything seems to be going perfectly, Yuri, as the holy balls, to ask if you are sure that this is wine, because such fine liquor does not fit for swimming in a place as common as Bruce. Of course the British polite before they soon disappear, being replaced by, and one of Jonathan's men is almost. He throws himself on top of what he orders him to calm down, and asks him whether that should be taken as a joke or an offense. Clearly does not want to fight, but it looks like Yuri, yes, he asked him what he would do if it is an offense, and hopes that he will apologize for his offense. However, Jonathan says it is not necessary apologize, because assumes that his attitude can only imply two things. You're a Krigan just like the rumors say, or two is testing them. to see if they are really suitable to form an alliance already. This is where it is clear that Jonathan is very smart and Yuri stands up, pointing out that there is nothing more dangerous than having an unreliable ally on them. So we would like to be shown whether or not are trustworthy. The best thing is that Jonathan insists that a discovery can only demonstrate his courage with his sword, and that is the sign that Maros. I was waiting to ask them to follow her to the field of training. Of course there will not be a direct fight between Yuri and Jonathan, one of a group selected from subordinates, starting with Laurent, the guy who almost hit him for being reckless, and in the stand Maros says that even though he was rude he doesn't care about having something well to see what. Yuri asks him not to make an effort to disguise himself, because you know what she was waiting for, and planned that something like this happened from the beginning, no matter what. The reality is that the city council is suitable for the men of the Bruisen because knows very well that one of them will end up with in one of the 10 strongest of the continent, just like his father. Practically he does not remember which one, so as the first begins, hopes to be able to, and they say that throughout the continent, the title of the 10 is a kind of certification that is the grants of the strongest, those who stand out above the rest of the warriors, making them practically untouchable before all conflicts and wars that may among kingdoms, and being so strong possess a power of deterrence, overwhelming, that could be the deciding factor for a war to take place, out or not, and Yuri knows he needs to take advantage of that moment to forge ties with those who have futures, promising to use as resources at a later date. And in general there is no better way to start a friendship between men who with a good fight for what he observes. Lauren put yourself in battle position, while the other man, Proen, mocks the fact that he is sure to. Sewell is a nobleman who has built his name, thanks to his family, and having won some elegant tournaments. However, you can see that you have no experience in battles, so he throws himself at him with confidence, without waiting for Lauren to receive it with a cold look, dodging their attacks with a worthy movement. A dirty look, biting. The blonde's battle style is flawless, obvious, but nothing either innovative, and he is sure to take the victory. And keeps going until something happens that leaves Maros speechless, and Jonathan standing in his seat, and in general, the only one that does not look like surprised is Yuri, who confesses that he was already expecting it. I expected to see Lauren dominate his opponent with 2 simple moves, until it is subjected, and the tip is placed of his sword in the center of his neck. Everything happened so fast that the dust around them does not even finish falling, and that Proteg gets excited noticing that Lauren normally never shows no opening, but this time it did, of garbage in sight. Weakness is that the opponent trusted and was direct for his career, but he only fell into the trap. For immediately afterwards Lauren turned his rest to neutralize the strength of the Bruin, then moved his center of gravity inward with an exact time, and in the end, deflected the attack while transforming its movement. In the next action, doing a checkmate. Perfect at the neck. This does recognize that Bruce's chest, it didn't hurt him either, and would probably have won, if not because he trusted too much. I wish Lauren could see the movements as open to create a highly efficient offensive line, so much that Pro and couldn't help but laugh, recognizing that he beat it justly, and extends his hand in a sign of respect as he demonstrated a great ability. The reinforcements of both sides clapped excitedly to see that great battle, and Jonathan congratulates for the talent of his men, to which Yuri tells him that his was not bad at all. He better not back down at that point. There are still many men to fight, and Jonathan's answer is clear when he calls a certain Jost to represent him. The next battle, and this one does not hesitate for a single second to enter the arena, with a muscular body and a ridiculously large sword that not everyone could handle. And with an unfortunate smile, Jonathan explains that Jost is the strongest of unity and promises to become in the strongest of all. Bruce, in causing Jetty to smile, thinking, bingo, he decide, call Jared to take care of the guide, and for a moment Jared doubts, so he will, shouts that he should stop being a coward and get down to work, advancing to face in front of Jost, or well in the face of, because the interpreter of Bruce is a giant, and although Jared is very kind, begins to sweat cold, recognizing that's the face of a wrestler who will do anything to win. And Jost realizes that he is measuring his strength, so he decides to give him a simple throw and a blow with all the weight of his sword, which for a moment Jared thinks of blocking until he just dodges it, knowing that perhaps such a blow could kill him, and from there the fight turns into a hunt where he does everything he can to escape from the giant, but Jost does not even give him a chance and continues to press, while Yuri thinks he has comparable strength to that of an orc, and the technique of a sword master also does not lose energy in movements, which also demonstrates great intelligence, factor that could undoubtedly lead to its conversion. One of the strongest days in the future, and in that, Jost lifts Jared's body, like a sack of potatoes, and throws it on the ground, taking the victory, and quickly help him up, congratulating him on having endured so long against him, and in the end he then thanks him for teaching him some things, to the blows, and Yuri resigns that it leaves the scoreboard 1-1. enough for both troops to see the potential of the other, and Mayoru wonders if that means that they have already finished recognizing each other, and the prota says yes to what this is very seductively close to him, and insisting that it is unfair, because it has not done anything yet to meet her. And then he made a move that for the first time, their seductive abilities had some effect on the prota, however, automatically gives him a look of few friends, which for her is a sign that she is better off. Walk away, and fortunately Jonathan visits discomfort, reminding him that he promised to give them a tour by your office, and they should go right now, because he forgets everything, saving this uncomfortable situation. But just as they were about to leave, the three together, the prota invents an excuse that he has to go meet his men, and runs away, leaving her more frustrated than ever. And as the days go by, the rest of the troops of the Allied forces, they have just arrived in Vilsack, and to everyone's astonishment, that includes Commander Supreme of the Empire. So each troop dedicates the first few days of the year to measure and observe the strength of others, and all but the Brioli troops, to whom the prota ordered them to concentrate solely in training, causing Hernando to worry a little, because by that point, the rest of the commanders have already started to meet to strategize and form alliances. Yuri understands his concern, but insists that these are just sad, half-hearted alliances, since this is a war where the strongest in each nation have gathered in one place to fight an enemy whom they underestimate more than they should, so they only care about demonstrating that are above of others, and in the end the best they can do is to show their strength in battle, and for that they need to continue training, and therefore proposes to organize a mini duel between his men. The first in taking a step forward is Lauren, who is confidently advancing, and promises that he would not dare to disrespect her, underestimating it, and with that in mind, are put into position, and activates its method of mana by emitting a clear energy because stable and even brighter than that of the prota, and Yuri recognizes that he is a great training partner. That Lauren launches herself against him with intensity, and although he manages to block that first blow, is followed by a flurry of swift attacks, and accurate that gives here of course that the prota dodges them, but at the same time recognizes that the possession of the sword is so perfect that it won't be long before until he makes a mistake, as long as they Lauren will continue to maintain the same level of perfection, and in that he can't help but remember the moment in which the blonde guy took her life in the past, and the way that even when it looks like an undead person being controlled by something, the cut continue being perfectly accurate, and Yuri understands the feeling that Lauren will go even further in that light. So he wants to be worthy of leading it towards the victory of a great future for the kingdom, and must also be worthy of fighting him face to face, and at that he launches an attack, powerful, that lifts a little sand around them, forcing Lauren to take distance for a few seconds, before he is to launch himself again as if he were his life depended on it. And thanks to the same time, Yuri manages to prepare for the impact, and receives it with a confident smile that makes viewers scream of emotion, and that Jared thinks they are a couple of exaggerators, as there is no reason to. The one who must fight so brutally in a simple duel, and automatically a voice behind his back acknowledges that the Prince Briol has an incredible ability, and when she turns her vision she is covered by the shadow of Joes, who greets him as if they were friends of a lifetime, and he goes crazy, asking the star that he also wants to fight. Automatically the prota tells him that there is no problem, and that will give him an unforgettable duel that is against Jared, which was not what he meant to Joes, but let's just say he settles for it and dies the poor to a clearer area so that they can be fun in seeing that the fight between them was over. Lauren thanks him, and Yuri insists he is looking forward to his next disappearance, before moving away from one of the trees to the surrounding area, and asks if it had any results. Of course he is not talking to himself but to Asana, who congratulates him on how much he has improved their skills, and explains that his research on this outsider goes quite well, because he even managed to trace it this far by referring to Vasucha tying himself to one of the strongest of the continent, and the only man in his past life who opposed Oku, having the guts to fight that beast alone. And in the end he was never able to figure out why he objected Oku so much to risk his life like that. But he knows he will need it if he wants to win that war, so he asks you to hurry. Cannot afford to wait, because if everything comes out as last time, that man will be devoured, keeping a free place among the strongest days, and attends a strategic meeting led by the half-brother of the Emperor and current Supreme Commander of the forces, Ally Spider Guy, imposing that the prota remembers having met in his previous life. It all happened when he was still dating Trina, and they were kissing in one of the empty rooms of the palace, and the girl asked for it to be more so that it would not be discovered, but Yuri insisted that no one was there around, and let what happened happen to him would be responsible. The problem is that just when they were about to kissing someone, Ragnar asking them to stop talking, and went to look for a room that was really empty. Of course he didn't mind that they were together. However, I asked the prota if he is serious, and when he said yes, he did, then downplay the whole thing, assuming they would manage on their own. And even with that little interaction, Yuri noticed that he was a very deep person, so it does not end to understand why the fuck he's doing it. Wait so long, to which one of the representatives indicate that they are willing to wait because is the perfect opportunity to connect with the imperial family. The problem is that the one who responds is the same one, Ragnar, that out of nowhere appears behind them, if in which no one had felt their presence. I found Yuri more than nervous, and in that, Ragnar sits in his place, recommending them not to trust, and as if to make it clearer is its method of mana releasing a paralyzing energy, and that almost the collapses right there while saying he hates. To all cowards his energy is so powerful that even Jonathan makes a face that could fall at any time, and the Proto thinks it's an entrance. Impressive. And finally, Ragnar explains that he will be in charge of personally anchoring anyone who tries to flee, but outside of it, we're all treated like heroes. What rewards mean? According to their achievements, and knowing that he is a person who values a lot of confidence, the Prota is the first to raise his hand to ask, what is the Empire's assessment of the strength of the orcs? Not without before to introduce himself as Yuri the Brio manager. Automatically, Ragnar smiles, revealing that she has heard a lot from him by Prince George, and that it does in fact have new information about orcs, discovering that such an OQO submitted the 3 major tribes to the point of turning them into one. Of course, that adds a whole level of difficulty to the mission, and have also confirmed the presence of an enemy camp around Velsex, so you have in mind go to the first battle in one day. The problem is that he needs a volunteer for and does not hesitate to ask the protagonist if you can leave that in your hands to what without much choice. Yuri accepts, and in the evening he spends a relaxed time by the fire until Meros unites by congratulating him on having obtained the event guard, because, despite being a dangerous position, it is also highly valued, and everyone wanted to get it. That surprised her because at first glance, that one, as competent as to have devised a great plan to obtain it, increasing great sensitivity that he feels towards him, and at that point it may seem, but confesses that the lives of its own citizens is at stake. You do need to know everyone very well, those involved, to see if you can trust them, and need you to respond honestly, to open with it, and if she is satisfied with what she discovers, can even help him in the battle. Yuri asks him how I would help you, to what Miros reminds her that she is not known as the Duchess Mage for nothing, has its tricks, and can assure you that it is much more useful. Hernando in battle, and finally, Yuri confesses that he will have many casualties in the first battle, and the Vanguard is a very dangerous place in any war, and cannot avoid to be concerned about their men. All those people who eat, laugh, and speak at that moment, without knowing that they could become useless cold, just because he made the decision, selfish, to accept that avant-garde is not that it wants to be dynamic or to be pitiful, for something that cannot be changed, since it is only expects to be able to assume this weight correctly. Words that leave Meros completely captivated, to the point of standing up and approaching him, weighing that although he still does not like it, that I am unable to see her as a woman will help him in this first battle for challenge destiny together. And finally the Prota shakes his hand, making a deal, and after that we spent the first day of the war between orcs and forces allied with both sides, preparing for action, and Yuri asking his men to be very attentive. The whole situation is so tense that a deep silence is felt until Ragni breaks it by mentioning that it will soon be time for the Vanguard, so he doesn't quite understand why Rose is out here instead of your post. She only replies that she was asked to lend a hand, and could not refuse, confessing that he has come to make him a small favor, the Prince of Briel. So when he finally gives the signal to start, to advance, the Prota asks his men if they are ready, and launch into battle, meeting directly with a solid wall of orcs that are already waiting to destroy them. However, what he calls the most attention is that Yuri is not only personally leading his troops, but is the first ahead in attitude. Courageous but also very reckless, which could cost him life, and what he does not know is that he is guarded by someone even stronger. And at that, Maurice pulls out his cane, explaining that this is what he has come to do, and in a matter of seconds, creates a giant ball of fire that covers almost completely, and then mercilessly through the enemy army. The problem is that between the orcs and Yuri they are a few meters away, and Ragnar warns him that the allied troops will also end up tired, but the redhead tells her not to worry, because that's just what Prince Yuri wanted. And at a distance they see that the Prota takes advantage of this factor, surprise for jump over the orcs, annihilating them so quickly that they did not even they know what hit them, and in that the fire hit them, reaches but does not seem worried, because he pulls out one of the daggers we saw earlier, and invokes a wall of water with which he protects his men, while orcs are reduced to ashes. So that despite the personal health may recede on the men of Briol remain standing, taking advantage of water for cover and steam for surprise attack, without the enemies being able to do anything about it. And on Yuri's side, this one is not only in charge of protecting the backs of his men, but takes advantage of the magic of daggers to throw them against their opponents, annihilate them, and return them to their hands just in time to fight with the next. And when that's not enough, the kids appear to protect it in seconds. And apart from the soldiers of burial in the advanced stage is also found Josu recognizes that they are just what expected from the famous nation of savages, and gets so excited that he jumps off his horse to sweep away the orcs with his giant sword. And on the other hand, troops from the Holy Kingdom join the feast, and Sylvia gives the order to protect the burial hybrids at all costs, that the enemy formation has collapsed, and that it is time to turn yellow. Everything happens so fast that Ragnar can only observe in surprise, knowing that the vanguard is often a hostile sight, where men are going to be mentally psyched to die. But the fact that I was in the head, everyone's morale was rising, taking it to its highest point. Also the strategy of asking the Duchess for help, magician, was effective, because at first glance it looked like a silly move, in that Meros confesses that I had originally refused to paint plan, but the unfortunate one managed to convince her, and has just demonstrated, who is not as crazy as he seems, is more, and in the feeling that he is a capable person, to turn around any situation that may arise. Just what they needed. For the first battle of the Allied forces, because it is, the confrontation ends with a crushing victory for mankind, and already in the night, while drafts a report on what happened, acknowledges that it was all thanks to Prince Briel, but that does not give him the right to enter to your room without permission. And before, what do you think the story got my rose? Really refers Hernando, who teleports with her, insisting that they should be more attentive with his former master. What the redhead tells her that no teacher would abandon his student in the way in which he did it years ago. The interesting comes when he confesses that he has come to check his progress with a certain subject matter, the research I was doing on the formula of transcendental interpretation, a magic designed to link messages in order to understand their meanings. At first glance it seems to have nothing to do with interests of Hernando, but explains that he wants to updates to understand Yuri's destiny, and that surprises Meros, warning me that someone with the title of great magician like him should not intervene in human history. And that's something that Hernando knows, however, reveals that many people are becoming entangled in the fate of Yuri, including the commander of the empire, and in a change of scene, we can see that the Proto was called by Ragnar, who offered him the following reconnaissance mission. Of course, Yuri can hardly believe it, and the blonde explains that the plan the next day is to enter to the eastern plains, which is pure orc territory, so they expect the road to be full of ambushes, and that the army must advance along with to a crushing tension, and with only that information Yuri deduces that his job will be tasked as a separate unit to evaluate the area and protect the main formation of the alliance. However, he insists that the troops of Briel already taken in the previous battle, so that just the right thing to do would be to give someone else the opportunity to shine. The problem is that Ragnar only trusts the skills they have seen with their own eyes, and would prefer that Briel stays in front of what Yuri smiles at, proposing an alternative that will make them all happy. And, as expected, they leave them in doubt, but minutes later, commanders receive a communique informing them that the plan is to leave early in the morning and will receive support of a recognition unit that will not be chosen by making traditional methods, but through a competition of the armies of the participating nations. Sounds crazy, but with that basically declares that he would not let his troops mediocre take one of the most important positions. And that is everyone. Because the competition will be an orc hunt, where they will have to annihilate orcs and cut off their right ear. And depending on that number, positions for their future battles will be assigned. Automatically, Hernando knows that the main character was the one who suggested this idea, and this one admits it, repeating that it will be the perfect opportunity to measure the true abilities of every nation, and in that Jared reminds him that reconnaissance missions are not among Abriel's strengths, to which the protect tells him not to worry because he has in mind a strategy infallible to get away with it. And thus the next day Reins explains the details of the mission, as they will advance according to planned with the main forces, while other select groups of each nation will evaluate the surroundings by hunting all the orcs that are possible. Not only that, but will also have a time limit, so giving them high watch announces that the competition begins when Yuri, Sylvia and Jonathan retire, and Ragnar cannot help but show a princess, and one of her men acknowledges that he seems to have confidence in himself. At the Prince of Brieli, Ragnar admits that although he is still very young, he can't deny that the boy has caught her attention. In fact, if it results again, they begin to appreciate it, and Yuri has no doubt that he will make it, calming Jared's concerns. That for now all they have to do is to concentrate on finding the orcs. Logically the boy tells him that finding them will not be enough, but the main character only mocks his concern, repeating that he has a way to win, and in that they manage to identify a cavalry of orcs, so they advance towards them, showing them the famous red gem necklace. Most impressively, the effect is automatic, for the creatures turn to him to see him as a kind of prey, while Yuri just waits for him at a site, asking him to the kids to fight with everything but not to wear too violent, as they have to secure those ears. And with that in mind the slaughter begins, where it is clear that the necklace not only makes them more violent, but also fools, so even though they are still brutal, are able to master them without major problems, and everything changes when the troops' enemies join him. An Orbol with a presence, even more intimidating, of the last one that the Prota eliminated, yet he does not let that frighten him. Maintains his rhythm by cutting off his head with a single movement, and in a matter of minutes, manages to defeat the entire group, and Yuri thinks he has prepared two things for that mission: the necklace of the bandits, and the magic daggers that only serve to attack from a distance, having much more tricks, including the following, because out of nowhere, one of these sinks into the ground, generating a kind of energy that wraps around and gives him the confidence to announce that before returning, will annihilate all the orcs in the area, and little by little we understand that this energy is but one of the many facets of soul's operation, a method unique in the property of converting anything, depending on the user's will, and with a little creativity, that means they can do great things. How to dunk the mana inside the seismic dagger so that once this one sinks into the ground, imitates waves of energy filled with its own mana, which allows you to recognize everything that moves on the earth, including if he can't see it, and that's just what he did moments ago. So now if your confident grandmother made much more sense, serving basically as a kind of geolocator with which to detect enemies is Pan. And after a while we return to the main troops where Raga announces that time is over, and that it is time to count how many orcs annihilated every team. The first ones are poor devils, that they could not locate a single enemy, so it tells them that they are pathetic, and it goes on like this, with each of the smallest kingdoms remaining, genuinely surprised that they have not been able to eliminate any. Statistically it is impossible for them to be so conservative. But things change a little bit when it is the turn of Bruce and Jonathan, who gives them a bag with 6 ears, the best so far. To which this clarifies that they had fortunate to find a whole unit of sensitivity, and Ragnar replies that luck is also a skill, because in the heat of battle, some people die only for lack of luck. And at that he receives the bag of an imperial unit, improvised that he himself sent so that it would not be left out of the competition. In total, they managed to annihilate 12 orcs, what is not bad at all, considering they left an hour later. Of the rest of the teams, of course, that frustrates Sylvia a little bit, who insists that it is a way to make fun of them, but already winning. Ragnar insists that what really matters is, or the results they have in battle. His grandfather disappears when his subordinate tells him that there is still one bag left to count, Briel's bag, and puts on the table a jacket that at first glance easily has to have about 40 years, and then he asks the star what is his secret, and he replies that nothing special, just good attitude and hard work. And already in the evening, Jared, in charge of coordinating activities of the camp, when a guy walks past him, bumping into his chest and looking at him in a way super inspective. At first try not to give it too much thought, but after a while he ends up going sipping at the, insisting that to Greeks of other nations have recently been provoking the ears, something that Yuri was already expected, and reassures him, saying it is pure envy for what should not happen to adults. In addition, now what is really important is to deal with the orcs they managed to capture, among them a sorcerer whom Ikori wears all night. You have to question, without much success, and out of nowhere the sorcerer starts screaming like crazy, repeating again and again the word black dog, and Ori explains that a rumor has been circulating between orcs on a mirror capable of detecting orcs, as if it were a dog, clearly refer to the Prota, and although Jared can't help but laughing, Corey insists he should not take it as an honor, for that also means that it is now recognized as a worthy enemy that adds up several points to the Prota's self-esteem. However, word selection also implies that it is the dog of the Empire, and the heroes change instantly, ordering them to cut off the head of the bastards, and luckily Corey calms him down by reminding him that these are the orcs, more talkers they have encountered so far, and in fact the guys keep dropping words, revealing that Kurui, one of the direct subordinates, Bokat, and one of the most fearsome warriors of the tribes, has already finished preparing to receive the allied forces. And Corey warns him that Kurui's plan is to annihilate them before they even have the opportunity to reach Bokat, and the Prota thanks him for his work, ordering Jared that they can now eliminate them. While he informs every detail to Rian's what the Prota hope is that barely enter the blonde guy's store and ask him if he has a girlfriend, having the nerve to say, who has a very pretty niece, and that when the war can submit an offer that for any person who it would be like winning the lottery, but not the Prota, who comes out of there having flashback from Vietnam and repeats himself time and time again that he has to avoid the unfortunate until he meets, who kindly tries to calm him down, and let's say that he succeeds because by it occurs to him that in order to get the frog off his chest and never tries again, pair it with Trina, it would be best to pretend he dating someone who, I don't really want it, but I have a big debt to pay, with him the point that he cannot refuse his request, and of course that person is Sylvia, who automatically takes for the shoulders, and then, to remind him in a way nothing, woman who saved his life in the past, insists that very soon, we'll need your help with an issue, and that it has to be. However, he does not give it any details, and only leaves her super confused to what she. Danik appears out of nowhere, behind his back, insisting that the two look great together, and that it has your support in case you want to try it with the Prince of Brielle. In response, Sylvia looks at him with a face that reminds is how perfect the plan of the and the next day all the troops of the forces allies resume his way when Jared approaches him, telling him that he has already heard the rumors, and the reason why Ragnar is so delighted with him and continues to call him his store every night is because they are discussing the details of a possible marriage to the famous Yuri Trena. Try to clarify that this is not the case, but when he turned around when he saw the rest of the kids, realizes that everyone is aware of the gossip, and there is nothing much to do but ignore them. In that you notice that they are being supported by an amount abnormal crows, which means that something is wrong, and decides to get ahead of himself to see what the fuck is going on. Unfortunately, it is worse than anyone would then have warned to arrive to a magic step full of shattered corpses of civilians, and Queen knows that it is the way that the unfortunate ones have to give them welcome, and in the mind of the protect acknowledges that this is not only a warning, but from one of the habits most unpleasant of such creatures, and is to use humans as ornaments, all way to have fun, and tell them that this is what they are worth, and taking advantage of the fact that the other troops have not yet seen the scene. Yuri proposes to clean the bodies, so as not to lower their morale and rank, except for what the soldiers of Brielle's are in charge of burning any remnants of the massacre, while Yuri reminds them over and over again that they cannot leave, that they like it. And at that point he notices that two of his men enter too much inside the canyon, so they are ordered back. But this is taken very lightly, and continue to inspect the area, until one of them realizes that the tip of some arrows are directed at the ground in the opposite direction, which the orcs use to impale the bodies. Is as if they had been shot from above, as if this route were less a random path and more of a trap. Practically they do not realize that they too have fallen, until it is too late, for the silhouettes of dozens of orcs begin to peek out from a distance. Without warning they shoot, neutralizing one of them in a matter of seconds, and quickly the other shouts that they find themselves under enemy attack, but at the sight of the arrows approach him at full speed, understands that it is too late to run. Fortunately, the prota arriving just in time to get in the way, in an amount of energy so great that it stops to the stairs, and to see that the wounded man is still alive, asks them to flee with the troops from the Holy Kingdom, who will not hesitate to help them. Unfortunately, it is obvious that they fell into the trap, more obvious in the fucking world, and at that moment the foxes just retreat quietly, as if they had given all the warning they needed, as if they were safe. That can be removed at any time, and the idea of having been seen as stupid makes that his blood boils, but he knows that it is not in conditions to attack, so he returns to the troops informing them of the situation. The problem is that since they are distributed routes in the area, can't help but pass by, so Ragnar tells them that they will have to attack, and Yuri insists that he has already thought about it. In fact, he has a plan, only needs one archer unit representing the unfortunate, while he and his men take charge of taking the lead of the crack, and thus the next thing we see is the orcs of yesteryear monitoring the area from the heights, until one of them perceives movements through part of a series of flies at full speed straight to it. Luckily for the unfortunate person, you are impact right against the edge of the crack. But it is not a mistake, but of the first warning from the team of goalkeepers from Ragnar, who orders them to be maintained cornered as long as possible, mainly because while distract him with attacks on the Herta begins to climb the high walls at a speed impressive, being followed by the rest of the soldiers of Brielle, although not as fast. No, it is the perfect route to take them by surprise. The problem is that orcs had already foreseen an attack of the style, and they respond to dropping a large rock on the head of the protect. That forces him to be a little more daring in his strategy, and from one second to the next Yuri lets out all dead daggers, cutting them with their mana to remove from the road the smallest stones, at the same time that create a kind of harmony with which it achieves free your hands and leave the biggest rock in two. The problem is that no matter how impressive there are, then that movement is something that can repeat very often, and it is his turn to use the sword as a support so as not to fall into the void. The good thing is that this attack was the signal he needed to know to hurry up. So he concentrates all his energy on climbing to the top, where he is welcomed by orcs with a warm welcome. Automatically these begin to scream, and Yuri recognizes the words of the other knight, "Black dog, so let them know it's him," before launching himself against them with all that he has, cutting off too many arms, heads, and everything in their path, and in one of these is face to face with whom he seems to be the strongest of the entire unit, because even without an arm responds with brute force superior that is barely able to block, yet knows it's nothing compared to how strong, which it would be if it had the arms, so he takes the opportunity to make fun of him, trying to keep calm, despite the fact that for every second that passes, orcs manage to continue to gather around him, making him feel even wilder than at first. And in one of these, one of the unfortunate ones almost stabbed him with a gigantic spear, on his back, and even though it manages to block it, that's the signal I needed to paint the Jared. And to the others who are in a hurry, it is not so strong either, to maintain that pace for longer. Fortunately hard, of answers that are almost at the top, and seconds later he and Lauren finally arrive by taking a second to rest before they join the party, and thanks to that the rhythm of the battle changes considerably, but Yuri knows he cannot afford it and continues to yell at the rest to give themselves hurry because they have no time to waste on breaks. And so little by little it is no longer at 20 against 3, but all its unity against orcs that begin to die one by one, and Levist confident and a laugh, proud to Ragnar the main forces of the Alliance cross the canyon without suffering a single, goes down, and they can finally rest at the camp where Yuri Jared meet to discuss what strategies they will use against Furue, whose fortress is getting closer and closer. The blonde man mentions that Sylvia sent him a message, informing him that even if he is not happy, that it continues to be carried. All merits is ready to send you a couple of priests to help him to be necessary, and pending a gossip. Jared asks him if they have anything, to which the Pertat automatically says no and sends it back to his store, being left alone with the map. With Asana, which takes hours, behind his back without his realizing his presence, until he informs him that he has finally found the man they were looking for, Kendall. Found inside of the territory of the orcs, not working with them or fighting against them, but was captured as prisoner of war. The problem is that they don't even. She was able to advance further to try to free him, so he warns him to be very careful from now on, knowing that he has a particular interest in man, but you've only heard bad things like this, and has a feeling that if he and the forces, allies, could even oppose them. Here it is necessary to clarify, who always referred to the guy like a broad, so we'll call it that. Yelesana asks him if he should continue his research, but Yuri reassures her by that he will talk to the man when he sees it, and the Pertat is sure that what the foreigner wants most is the head of Okua, and if they have the same objective, may have him as an ally, and for now, all he wants is Kasana is in charge of watching him until he arrives, and is, except with some doubt, insisting that if what he plans to do is to meet with the foreigner personally, would like to accompany him to protect him in case that it is necessary to. Although it is a kind and perhaps necessary gesture, Yuri stands up, reminding her that he did not hire her to be her bodyguard and risk his life unnecessarily by him, so he himself will protect himself. The problem is that, because of the woman's face, it is clear that he did not take it well at all, and wastes down his attempts of doing so by offering her some desserts to Sanita. Gus disappears, determined to fulfill its mission, and later the Prota meets up with some soldiers by the fire, and Jared recounts the story of when they met the Angel of Death, adding some details just to look like the veteran responsible before rookies. Even when Yuri, it wasn't that epic, as A told, yet when the boys ask him if it is true what Jared is counting, plays along with him by stating that he did the best he could, and let it be followed, remembering in his glory a little more, and little by little Jared passes by, to decline to give them a life lesson with 1,000 reflections. But everything changes when the Bertat notices a figure behind his back wearing rags. Automatically stands up, because it is too large to be a human, and right there, realizes that it is a orc and order them to stand guard. However, when Jared and the others turn to face the enemy, he is missing just for that heart. Asks him if he couldn't have seen wrong, recommending that he go to sleep at the time Yuri insists that the orc is still there, only apparently he is the only one who can see it, and out of nowhere the figure vanishes like a kind of shadow, and knows it's too real to be pure illusions. So he begins to follow it along the forest, concluding that it is of an explorer with ability, an invisibility or something, and in the end he has no choice but to attack, emitting such a strong blow to kill anyone, but the shadow only anticipates and falls upon him, extending his whole body in a super turbid manner, instinctively uses his Nana method of getting rid of him. However, you can feel the remains of that dark aura on him, so come Hernando to tell him what the fuck was that, and he was in the middle of a good poker game. So try to get him to leave quickly to demand explanations that perhaps it was covered with sorcery to remain, and that he was able to see it thanks to his instincts. So the problem is that the fact that they have orcs with the ability to become invisible. Add another variable to take into account in the next battle, and the prologue it needs is a kind of countermeasure. However, Hernando tells him that there are limits for the use of magic in battle, especially because the unfortunate practice of very dangerous branch of black magic. Because of that, the best they can do is not to respond with more magic, and not to counteract and dispel the tricks of the enemy sorcerers, and that's just what he will do, which the Pertal appreciates. Advertise that the next time you organize a night of cards, and do not invite him to bet, we'll have a big problem. And after that he leaves it for the following, having fun, and in a change of scene, we go straight into what appears to be the Guru's lair, who receives a report of nothing more, and nothing less, that the sorcerer, who had been watching the Pertat, before, and he tells her everything he saw. And the most important thing is that it activates a new spell that enhances skills of his entire army, or so it seems. And the next day, Ragna orders a full-scale attack against the camp of Kurui so that all the troops are gather on the waiting for the right moment to attack. That of course includes the forces of Brails who are once again making themselves advanced charge, lurking against the walls of the fortress at full speed. The problem is that it does not happen, not even 2 seconds, until the enemy archers respond with hundreds of arrows blocking the sky, with a great avalanche of destruction that the Berta was not expected, and although he orders the withdrawal, many of his men also end up wounded, falling lifeless on the spot. And with each of the deaths, Yuri may feel it's his fault, but it is repeated that it must continue to move forward, since the reality of the is that they are not only the advanced, but the bait, forcing orcs to concentrate on them. While the real attack is led by Ragnar, who begins, and at that time the Blonde gets into an orderly movement to open the door at once, so they use a giant drum, called a battering ram, to bring them down with a single blow, creating the perfect opening for the Imperial army to enter, taking orcs by surprise. The Pertat asks his men to stop and see from a distance that Ragnar is finally opening that way through the door principal, which means that her role as bait is over. That's exactly why the next thing they have to do is to join them. If, however, at that time is interrupted by Jos, who has been following them, and insists that perhaps the forces of Ragnar are attacking the front door, and the best thing is to take advantage of to attack to the rear and bring them down faster. And the Prota tells him that he is right. However, it does not have any battering rams that can be used, and the back of the camp will be set for defense only, so going through it will not be easy, eliminating any surprise factor, to which Jos reminds him that they do not always need each other weapons to open that passage and draw his sword, making it clear to you that he can take care of that. And in this way, the next thing we see is an angel face to face in front of the walls, which are at least 3 times higher than he does, but instead of intimidating, he attacks himself with confidence, creating a tsunami of mana that destroys the wall with a single blow by opening itself, an unprotected area to which the orcs have clearly never thought that we will be able to access. And without wasting time, the Prota congratulates him and gets in motion, cutting off orc heads as they pass by, while telling his men that it is time to demonstrate that they have come to do in that place have not only come to represent the allied forces, but also to Abriel and the power of this kingdom. And automatically a group of orcs prepare their spears to receive them with all that they have. But Harry is in charge of destroying his weapons within movement, and with a determination that even surprises the star. I recognize that he seems more excited than usual, and hearing that, Lauren knows it's time to stand out and look good against Yuri, so he also gets going, cutting off heads while jumps on the orcs, all in the name of their highness, the Prince of Briol. And the best thing is that all the excitement they put in battle also ignites the spark of the soldiers of Brusen, who are not willing to let Briol takes all the glory, and they take advantage of the momentum to finish sweeping with the units that were in the area. And from a distance, the Prota recognizes that the defense of the orcs is finally weakening, but it seems to him rare to see no trace of the main forces that technically should already be found scattered inside the camp. The worst thing is that this small advantage goes to hell when he shows up, a whole unit of cigars, orcs that begin to crush soldiers as if they were, and even were about to take down Jared. If it weren't for the fact that the Prota intervened just in time to get it out of the way, and without hesitation tells him that he cannot die after speaking, telling their epic stories only once, ordering him not to come down to guard as they still have a lot of work to do. And maintaining composure, Yuri confronts the Orble and rips off one of his arms, but although the red flag that characterizes them falls to the ground, he can't help but have a very bad feeling about what is about to come. The feeling that there is something else, and at the distance we can see that in the center of the Kurui camp finally makes its appearance, of course, still a little short of reaching the area in which the Pertat. So they take the opportunity to continue fighting against the Orbox until the feeling of restlessness is too much to ignore it. Fortunately, Jared also realizes, and Yuri orders him to accompany him to face whatever it takes inside that store, hoping to reach you in time to help the poor. Unfortunate that they are facing that thing. And out of nowhere a soldier comes out, fired at full speed from inside the store, as if it were a simple doll. And although Kuru finally sets foot on the outside, this one disappears as fast as it appeared, launching himself against the soldiers at a speed and agility that an orc as big as him should not be able to have. And if it were not enough, when he is left in the middle of a large group of soldiers, begins to turn its axe, splitting them in half, leaving a thick blood mist that spreads all over the creating an extremely gloomy image. The humiliation is so great that Yuri begins to tremble and orders him to all his men to retreat, because from here will not be able to resist. Automatically its men clear the area and he advances towards Kurui, ignoring Jared's warnings, who insists on joining him. However, Jos tells him that he is Colombian, and that he doubts that is even able to hear it at that moment. That is an enemy that deserves all its concentration, and if they try to intervene, they will end up in the way. Yet he also knows that Yuri will not be able to do it alone, so he worked to fight the prince, while they take care of the other threats, and with that, off the road we move on to the battle between the Prota and Kurui, who responds to his attacks with magical ease, and smiles with the confidence of someone who has all his movements coldly calculated, and like last time Yuri realizes that if he is hit by one of his blows, will fall to the ground immediately. You must think in his strategy, and his astonishment comes when Jose gets in the way of the two of them, mentioning that he could use a hand, and that they can cover their backs frequently. And what it does not mention is that the reason he decided to help is not only strategy and not because I understand something in the Prota's eyes, the eyes of a mother pushed to the edge of a cliff. Someone's eyes, who has many backs to protect. The impressive thing about seeing it in action is that it can feel that fear is gone and the only thing left to do is to willingness to protect their men, as someone who knows very well what it means to lose people in war, and at that time, gives you a signal to come closer, and the kids do not hesitate to respond to the challenge, each one advancing at its own pace and intensity. The problem is that the same attack as before had been enough to destroy a wall is nothing to the orc who blocks receives with agility, causing Jose himself to recognize that it is a mirror, and then it is the turn of the protagonist, who attacks him again, but his blow not only has no power necessary to be taken seriously, but Kurui takes it of the mirror and throws it to the side as if it were a stone on his way, and what the orc did not expect is that the stone can also use a weapon, and Yuri is able to literally cut his palm, determined to do whatever harm is possible now. Despite being weaker, he mocks, stating that his men will be in charge of annihilate their proud orcs, without being able to do anything to stop them, as even more so, challenges to finish them off in order to lend him a hand to his people, and continues with the attacks now, fighting together, which allows them to change the course of the battle, and Kurui begins to feel the pressure that it won't be so easy, as a boy so much that he starts to scream, but not of pain, but calling something, and in that the clouds finish covering the little clarity that remained in the sky, causing it to darken, filled with an extremely sinister energy. Energy traveling direct to Kurui, strengthening him to the point of attacking Jose, direct to that, still unable to do anything to protect itself. Unfortunately the mirror does not fall, but responds and so on, injured as it is, lashes out at the giant, letting him know that he will need a lot more power if he wants to defeat him, and of course Yuri is in charge of covering his back, and both reach the same conclusion. Since the appearance of that black smoke, the abilities of the unfortunate increase is the same as the feeling that the Prota had the night before when he saw the ghost sorcerer, so he expects that Hernando is able to the magic of the area before that it is too late. And the problem begins when dark energy spreads outside Kurui's body, soaking every enemy on the, causing them to become at least 10 times stronger than before, and at that moment the balance of the breaks again, and the unfortunate even begin to heal as part of the magic, causing the weakest orcs to take advantage of the soldiers, and that the owner has no choice but to intervene so that they are not annihilated. However, it is extremely obvious to him that they have become ridiculously strong, and most surprising of all, when you manage to open the of one of these in two, and does not die, but regenerates automatically. At the same time the sorcerer leaves his castle, taking advantage of the proximity to envelop Yuri inside the black mist, and in his mind an unknown voice begins to repeat over and over again not to resist. And if that were not enough, a giant eye observes him closely, asking him why he is the only one still alive, and out of nowhere images of their brothers being annihilated with pure mind, and 1 second to the next is surrounded by friendships for all the people he loves, who blamed him for abandoning them to their fate, for staying alive knowing that the fall of the kingdom was his fault. And when the Prota sees himself, and it is no longer him, but the larger version of the other timeline, who fled and surrendered to abandon his honor and responsibility as a member of the Briols, and at the same time his voice repeats that he is Mexican, trying to change things, because that is their destiny, and even if it seems that the Pro was going to fall for his trickery, just answer yes of course, and let out his mana technique by freeing himself from the darkness, as if nothing had happened, for taking it so seriously, to want to scold him, but for him all his speeches about destiny are nothing more than just stories, and after removing the remnants of snow around it remains to be face to face against the sorcerer, who desperately tries to continue tying it without much success. A comparison with all the enemies he has faced so far, this guy is nothing, and throws itself against him, annihilating it in a single stroke, which causes the layer of snow that covered the sky to disappear, as well as the effect enhancer that had in the orcs. And when the sorcerer falls lifeless and knows it's your chance, so he screams at the top of his lungs that the magic has been broken, which quickly lifts the spirits of his men, taking advantage of the push to put the scales back on track in his favor. And as soon as Jose, it is impressive how much he has managed to endure, even when wounded, but unlike the others for him, fine plays against, and Kurui makes it very clear to you when he punches him right in the butt that he does it. Vomit blood. Before falling to the ground, without even being able to move, and the orc is so beastly that even having him on the ground, he throws himself on top of it to finish the work, and although the prota approaches as quickly as it can to intervene, Chose yells at him to stay away because he doubts that either of us is able to withstand that blow. But one of the decisions he made, Yuri at the moment of accepting this new lie, was never to give up, and that's what he will do. We'll continue to fight to the end. What none of them expected is that out of nowhere the Kurui's arm flies away, but not because of the prota or Joe's, but from abroad, who finally enters the congratulating Yuri because he has done quite well so far. And throughout the process the expression of man is a pure calm because is nothing to him, to the point that when Kurui prepares to respond, he takes it by one of the horns of his helmet, ordering him to remain silent, for it is a plague for that world, and he didn't even have the nerve to feed it. Well, during his confinement, already hearing the accent of his voice, and the complexion of his body, and the very particular shape of his body, in which he uses the sword, Yuri realizes that this guy is the one I've been looking for all this time. But the most impressive thing is that does not even have time to process before that with a movement, nimble, and sure to cut off the orc's head in order to battle once and for all. And when they come face to face, the foreigner tells him that he only decided to intervene for things, interesting facts they showed during the battle, but that it ruined the plans he had. To which the prota doesn't even let it end. That also gives a couple of compliments in the process by mentioning that he must be the guy that, even being a foreigner, achieved a position as one of the strongest days the continent. In a nutshell, it leaves you to know that he knows very well who he is, asking him if the reason he let himself be captured was to reach Okua, and if so you can help him, you can work together. What changes completely the defiant expression of the foreigner and pass the rest of the afternoon annihilating the rest of the camp orcs and Ragnar, even in charge of placing Kurui's head on a spear. What for? Yuri is a clear sign that things are improving since they were better off in their previous lives. The allied forces never achieved a victory. Progenitor. History is changing, and once all calmed down, Jared informs him that the casualties, they weren't even as bad as they thought they would be, for the greatest damage they received was psychological. After seeing hell inside the barracks of the Kurui, full of angels and women abused to give birth to Simurkas, and Yuri orders all survivors to receive attention as soon as possible, and that follow includes requests from the foreigner at the foot from the letter to what Harry makes it clear that they have been doing so. But the bastard is a complete pain in the ass, who complains about every single meal they give him. Not that they are 100% perfect, and taking pity on him, Yuri knows it's time to go talk to the guy, and finds him giving himself a feast by the bonfire, and once he finishes his plan, is to start making questions, but the foreigner gets them ahead of him, for first he wants to know how he was able to override the dirty tricks of that sorcerer. Clearly see, that was the most impressive thing, and caused him to decide, intervene. So you need me to be 100% honest, and depending on your response, will he let it live or not? And because of his tone, Yuri knows he is very serious, and that it is not worth lying, so he tells him that he is not quite sure how he did it. His herd method simply reacted and cut it off. It right there for you to see what the technique he inherited consists of its ancestor. The curious thing is that in response that foreigner tells him that they were apparently destined to meet is that method you are talking about, knows him very well, since the sect in which he was raised and from which he learned everything he knows is related to Indrik Boreal, who in the opinion was a kind of benefactor for their own ancestors, to the point that over there he is known as the swordsman, destroyer of heavens. At that time he was the best friend of the cult leader, and to put an end to the demonic sect by becoming an important figure within history. On the other side of the also clarifies what is happening. Tradition continues to grow, left at that time, so his technique has similarities to that of the prota, and now the reason why he is here is to eliminate to anyone related to the roads. Exorcise the evil of the world, which explains why he is so with killing orcs, especially with Okua, an opportunity for Yuri does not plan waste, offering him their help and that of all his troops to fulfill his such target will have hot water, food, the title of honorary hero, and once the war has finished, a lot of money. All you have to do is join the war on his side, and with all those things, the foreigner accepts instantly, just on the condition that he meets him master, since he has seen potential in it, and is willing to take him as of course one. Not official, because even if you don't believe it, the part of the sect, it costs a great amount of money, and even a good amount of money involved, but the foreigner is willing to pass. That's because of his talent. The detail is that the prota already has a master, the well-known demon of the sword. What offends very much the man, he insists that she can have 2 teachers without any problem. However, the important thing now, it needs to meet with the commander of the forces, allies, because if they are going to help them, there is something you need to know about orcs, and in this way they meet in the Hogna tent, where without hairs on the tongue reveals that Kuwa is carrying out human sacrifices, not so much to eat or torture them, but as a means of to black magic. That is proof that the entire army is already completely corrupted, using dark techniques, like those you saw in the last battle, to increase power of combat, of course. Nothing assures them that this is the last trick they have under the sleeve, so they must think of some countermeasure, and Obrod reveals the reason why he left himself to reach Alcut as a supposed sacrifice. Logically its plan, it is ruined, and that is why now it is not another one to collaborate with them, something that rank accepts me, agreeing to have the pro to take care of the foreigner, while he helped his men investigate whether there is some effective way to counteract that black magic, and in that he asks Yuri if it is true that one of its subordinates is a semi-orc, and when this says that he does ask you to please take care of saying what will find the half-orcs they rescued from the camp of Perui, of course accepts, but he knows he was only assigned that job because it's something no one else wants, and things get interesting when he arrives at the place where they are being held, listening to an Empire soldier arguing with Kerman, for he believes that they should add the half-orcs to his army to turn them into heroes, warriors, and basically overcome Abriel in that aspect, and Graham tells them that they should also think about poor women who will never be able to overcome this horrible trauma, and that is where the Perta finally decides to intervene, asking the soldier if he is sure they will be able to be help on Med. Automatically this shows that yes, they are very docile, and that they will not hesitate to follow their orders if they use some strength, but even though Yuri agrees with that, also reminds him that a prisoner of war can never be a partner in which they can fully trust their lives. Everywhere you see it, it is a very complicated decision. So he asks you to one of the women to tell what she experienced. That's the way. And like no solo orcs, but also half-orcs made their lives a complete hell. And with a trembling voice the woman tells that her younger sister was injured, and since she could not move, the unfortunate ones tore her to pieces, tearing their asses apart as if it were a simple insectiform. And Yuri asks him for his name, and it is presented as Janet de Feur, and recognizing her as the Prince of Briol, insists that he has only one request to make. Please avenge her. Of course Yuri accepts. And then he turns to Garham, clarifying that what they are going to do next, it will do it like Yuri. Briol the warrior, not as one of the commanders of the forces allies, no matter how much the Samurks have also been victims of Kuru, became accomplices in the murder of 2 innocent people and leave indelible scars on the survivors. Understands that they want to use them to their advantage, but to give value to those who trampling on human beings is not a possibility. So right now declare that they must annihilate them all, and to each of them. And for his part Graham agrees to carry out the execution, and continue like this all night long, until the next morning. Something happens that no one expected. A group of orcs arrive at the camp, not to fight, but supposedly to negotiate. More specifically, there are those who ask something to offer them. So although they are clearly not that dumb to trust blindly to that, you bastards have no choice but to open the doors. Expectations of finding out what the fuck they're planning. That's why the next thing we see is to the group of orcs talking. Between them will chill while raging. Read the document that he was given with such an expression, tick, that the Protac is unable to stand it any longer, asking him directly what it is all about. In response the blonde asks him why he believes he became the commander of the forces allies, and although the Protac add that it is because it is skilled at choosing the best battle strategy, asks you to try to think a little more in the political reasons why it is precisely he was elected to the post. And after that he clarifies that reality is that he does not have a very good relationship with the Emperor, and that technically it is logical that he sent it to him, and things in the Empire rarely respond to logic. If wins the war will be praised as a hero, and his political power will increase, but that's not so convenient for the Emperor as you might think, and even though he doesn't say it out loud, the Prota understands what he means. This is a war that the Emperor expects them to produce, to mate, to be as in and as a rager, and to rule out, improving his own reputation within the elites of the Empire, and in his afterlife the failure of the forces allies was the impulse that the Emperor needed to completely take over the Empire, and knowing that Shirley already made a deal with the orcs to make it happen. And Yuri asks him if he's hinting that all of that is a trap. Spadering is honest and says yes, handing him the message of the orcs, where he makes it clear that the Emperor made a secret pact with, and if he does not want to lose his life in a painful way, he will. It is best that he plays his role as commander in and stop fighting. Even though the orcs who came to give it to him insist on, which are an organization anonymous who opposes Kua, and Ragnar is not sure what to think, and asks what he should do about it. In response to, Yuri just throws the card on the floor, stepping on it with disgust, for regardless of the adversity of that message, or what the Emperor expects from them, the best they can do is to do what they had in mind. Return home with a victory. Of course Ragnar is in agreement with him, since there will be no future for any of them if they are defeated, or worse, give up, so they agree to keep fighting. with all that they have and asks him to take care of his guests, and in this way, Yuri goes out to where these were. The gossip is very quiet, and the annihilates all three in a single stroke. I love perplexed heroes. Not only did they know it was strong, but it seems to them a movement, a bit irrational. Because they were only messengers though, Ragnar reassures them by telling them that annihilating them is the best they could do. After all, Yuri has a promise to keep, and it's taking revenge on those fucking monsters. Later, the blonde man sends for a certain Asmina, who is one of the best magicians of the Imperial Court, to tell him everything he knows about dark magic. At first it reassures, telling him that it is a secret that can already be found, obsolete, and can be blocked by any heatsink. According to the stories, there was a type of black magic with the ability to revive and control the dead, but they are nothing more than simple shins that no one with two fingers in front of them would take into account. However, Ragnar reveals to him that there are strong rumors that Shiba is sacrificing humans to spells never before seen. To what Ragnar mentions that they may have found a method of dark magic of the ancient fairy tale nation that dominated those lands hundreds of years ago. They say they were very skilled with magic, and according to legends, was home to one of the 10 strongest that continues to roam that area to this day, being Hurt, the Angel of Death. And now when it comes to sacrifices, these are not usually used to enhance skills and not to invoke things, so it is possible that it may occur once to buy time, and if I had to guess I would say he found a dungeon inside the ruins of a Delvine, a dungeon with something very important within which you want to access, no matter what. And after that the forces of unity continue to advance, and one of the men of the Proti reports that the support of the Thalsach has been cut, most likely as a result of the constant attacks to the camp. That means that now also should focus on ensuring all supplies that can, which will not be easy at all, considering they are closer to Goose than ever. In fact, it would not be strange for them to send to as many orcs as possible to attack them. What wouldn't be so bad, considering that the lack of supplies leaves them in a position where they cannot afford to bet on a war of. Still, the thoughts of the Prota are interrupted when his horse begins to whinny and orders everyone to get off their horses. At the beginning, it looks like an earthquake, but it activates your mana method. Yuri can perceive it as something very different, and out of nowhere a power emerges from the ground, rising in front of them in a manner that automatically imposing. Ragnar orders her magicians to analyze her in search of some sign that is linked to orcs. However, the strange thing is that this one looks like have a kind of blockage, for they are not able to see beyond of the snow, and that's why Yuri proposes that they go in and find out for themselves, and contrary to Ragnar, he is moved by a good mystery and insists that there is probably something interesting inside that you must personally confirm. The problem is that although his intention is to take to their men and keep whatever they find themselves with, on the way the blonde orders them to take with them some failures of the Empire and assigns a small group of 3, ruled by a certain Rulin, of course, to Jair. She is not thrilled by the idea either of having to deal with these guys, but they have no choice, and they can only hope that they do not have second intentions no matter what. After that he stops in front of what he looks like be the door that is located fully sealed. So start evaluating the surrounding area in search of some mechanism. And the surprise comes when by mere instinct, Yuri puts his hand on this, using its method of mana, and as if that would activate something inside the tower, the door opens automatically by giving them the welcome with an overly suspicious ease. And for Yuri is as if he had been waiting the arrival of someone. So enter the deep darkness of the tower. And it is not until then that realize that none of them brought torches. Obviously that means who should return to look for some. But instead the Prota decides to try something else, and takes one of the torches hanging on the walls, applying his mana method to him to see if it also reacts in the same way that the door, and not only turns on the torch, but all those that are deployed down the corridor, and so on. Thrills Jared by asking him if he had been in that place, to which the Prota says no, but that is not enough to convince Rodini, looking at him suspiciously, and eventually reach a dead end full of orc bones, where the only way is a big door, accompanied by a shield that stands out from the rest of the world by being the only one who is not an orc but a human being. And little by little the whole scene begins to make sense, and the Prota understands that this person died guarding the door from orc attacks. However, unlike the rest of the tower, does not react when injected, and so he proposes that they go back the way they came from, to see if they went through any details, and the problem is that while he is talking, do not realize that the skeleton human has begun to move until it takes Yuri by the arm and emits a wave of blow-drying energy, while asking you to remember. But this is their salvation nevertheless. The strangest thing comes when Yuri opens his eyes again. Siva transported what appears to be the exterior of the tower, but not with your physical body, but as a kind of mental image. And at that moment a boy walks by his side calling. His teacher was moved, and realizes that it is not reality, but a memory. and the way you dress. Of the master understands that the memories are from that man before that he lost his life, and his chest was forgotten by that door. And what it looks like to be more impressive is to leave a memory like this after dying requires an absurd amount of magic, so it must have something very important to transmit. And after that the man asks the child if you completed the preparations for that day's election, to which it refuses, insisting that he is tired of just reading books and that it wants to implement all that has happened until now. And because of that the man shows him a large red crystal, explaining that this is the mark of the orc hunter, which means that it cannot be considered a real hunter more to go out to hunt until I found it. Of course, Yuri realizes that it is the same to the glass of the bandit's necklace, and now he understands because it works so well on the. But the astonishment comes when the child tells him that he does not even understand because they have to kill orcs in the first place, and that things could be improved if they talk to them. I would like to reach an agreement. At the beginning the man remains silent, but decides that it is time to reveal the truth. For the orcs, they are not really a separate breed or anything like that, but humans who have been contaminated by dark magic. That takes by surprise even the main character, who is completely paralyzed, while the man says that a long time ago, there was a nobleman deeply with the settlement killed its own citizens based on the most absurd motives. So the king ended up creating a law to prohibit the use of these drugs, atrocities, and get away with it. And little by little the nobleman went crazy, desperate for the idea of murder, until a sorcerer approached, offering him a solution. The king ordered that he could not kill humans. However, he told us that they could convert humans into something more, something I could kill through no fault of my own, or any repercussions. So a go down advice of the sorcerer, the nobleman pushed his own people into dark magic, turning them into heroes, grotesques with a great hostility towards humanity, giving him the perfect excuse to annihilate them and how and when he wanted to. That means that deep down all the orcs that the Perta eliminated so far, they are human, and the little one asks if that sorcerer was ever punished for his or her actions, to which the man explains that he heard just when his crimes came to light. Practically they never found a way to return them to their current human, because the orcs ended up being punished, and their duty as hunters is to save them. Of its horrible there is. And that revelation also better connects the foreigner's goal in eliminating evil from this world, as the fact that the base of the power of the orcs is the dark magic. However, just when it looked like I was going to get more answers, that memory fades by advancing a few years in time to the inside of the ruin, where the man insists on moving forward, and the boy tells him that the best they can do is to wait for reinforcements. The problem is that man is determined to move forward, repeating that no one will come to save them because a Delvine has fallen as it finally managed to bring the orcs to that place. And even though he knows he may die, his struggle will not be in vain, because he will resist, and everything Matt has taught the following generations. That's the cycle of life. But the boy tells him that even though Oyo won't get very far, so you can stay with him and fight. Listen to your memories re-recorded in these ruins in the hope that someone will find them. That is to say, these are not only the memories of man, but also those of the boy, both of them, who used their last strength to protect the secret of the true origin of the orcs and of themselves, the hunters who were once considered the strongest in the find. So while the man was fighting, the boy made sure to concentrate on those memories, everything he learned, in the hope that in the future, someone be able to finish it the task they themselves left incomplete. And the astonishment comes when their eyes do contact with those of the Perta, as if he knows he is there and warns him to be very careful with the devil's tone. And after that the boy dies, and the memories come to an end, so Yuri returns to the present with the feeling that not only saw someone else's memories, but revived experiences that he himself had forgotten. Deep into his sub and preoccupied Jared asks him if he saw anything else, and the Perta tells him that he will need some time to process it. But in that the tower begins to tremble and believes it is another earthquake, until he makes it clear that it is something worse, are being attacked by orcs. That takes all by surprise, as it can mean one of two things. Or curiously, they realize that they were there, or all that always was a trap to lure them on purpose. To which the Perta orders them to leave, to make such a fuss by clarifying that this place used to be the orc hunter's den. So it makes sense that they come to destroy it by seeing it emerge out of nowhere on those wide plains, and quickly eases its perceptual ability to identify the invasion of enemy forces, with a total of 10 orcs, which means they can handle them. So although the most logical decision would be to return with his main troop, your order is very different. They will stay there to fight. That takes astonishment to the men of the Empire, who ask if they should not retire, to what Yuri just take the old hunter's sword, emphasizing that it won't be necessary, because you know what is the way more effective in fighting against those monsters, so it's not the only thing it takes from the tower. For later, when the orcs try to enter the site, they look surrounded by a pile of hunter gems that were put there by the prota, strategically to destabilize them, and when gives the order allows the children to leave of the bushes, attacking them just at the moment in which they are most distracted, and as difference from the last battles they had. In this one they are not heroes fighting in a manner honorable with enemies at his level, not advancing through of the as hunters, pointing their heads and necks so effectively that it feels as if he has set a trap. All those leaves of compliment ads against what they teach in Briol, but which work and appear in your sub as if you had already been there, as if you were the orc hunter, with the knowledge that all their ancestors were refined for decades, and when it comes face to face with an enemy realizes that now even can see naturally what is the part more effective of the orc's body to attack, and in a single movement crosses his arm, putting him out of action, and no longer needs to fight them with all his might. And using the separation of the soul is no longer necessary when you can cut off his heads as if they were rats that messed with the wrong predator. Of course all this is thanks to hunters, and therefore states aloud that it will give him a good use of the legacy they left behind that will never be forgotten. Dolphin hunters, and at night the protagonist meets with Ragnar, who thanks him because thanks to them trying to secure the entire area around the ruins, and even though he doesn't tell you the whole truth, Yuri explains that this was the lair of hunters, and asks him if he knows anything about the volume of the devil. Madly Ragnar tells him that he had never heard about what the prote tells him that it is related to black magic, and undertakes to find out more about it. They were already waiting for him when he left the tent. Rodin, who tells him that he was super impressed with what he did in the last battle, and Yuri is to see that he can be kind, as it had previously been an ass pain, and he tells him it's because the rules of the Empire on how they should behave are very delicate, and who honestly had serious doubts what he was going to be like on the. But he has just proven that his age is no impediment, for he moves like a veteran. Experience it, although in reality Yuri is about 40 years old, and the gossip between the two is so good. Who asks him if he left a girlfriend there in Briel, automatically asks if Ragnar ordered him to find out that, and Rulin is made crazy, so take the opportunity to make it very clear who would never be involved with the Imperial invasion, which surprises the man, because all of them in the Empire she is admired, she is beautiful and kind-hearted. And the poor man blushes just to remind her of what makes her. Yuri remember that this is part of the strategy of the unfortunate woman to treat everyone in a manner who feel they are receiving special treatment, and in the end decides to start his own plan, stating that there is already a woman, that she is interested in him, and that she is in fact his girlfriend, mentally confronting Sylvia for getting her into that business. And even though I was very surprised, congratulates him, revealing that he also has a girlfriend, and that he plans to ask her to marriage when he returns, or to which Yuri warns him that he should not say these things, because there is that if someone says things like that, something bad will happen, and then something explodes behind his back. From what he looks at it with a face like I told you so, and they find themselves under enemy attack, and in a matter of seconds, the camp turns into a hell of flames, smoke, and of course, despair, because now more than ever they must protect the few supplies they have left. And the worst thing is that the first time Hernando is taken by surprise, without understanding how the fuck they were painted, hundreds of orcs to appear next to them without being airlines. Other than that, for some reason, your magic for dissipating is not only not working, and not that the unfortunate ones are annulling it automatically. Yuri realizes they are in trouble and approaches him, requesting a report on the situation, to what Hernando explains that it is as if the orcs would have set a trap with in advance, so the Pertar assures that he will take care of the sorcerers responsible for, but you will need me to use your magic as soon as you have the opportunity. And after that, just says goodbye with a story with you, and runs away. Dodo outspeed evaluating orcs for a clue to tell you which of them the sorcerer is from, and think of the old man's teachings. Hunter, who always insisted that the sorcerers, orcs lost their sight due to dark magic. So the way to identify Carlos was to look for the one who walked in shape, strange or unstable, and thanks to that it is able to find the person responsible in a matter of seconds, ends his neck with his sword, as if it were a kind of spear that neutralizes it enough to approach and brutally decapitate him. The only problem is that he is now surrounded by a large amount of ridiculous of enemies who look upon him as a hunter and is, but contrary to what they may think, is no longer alone, because right there Hernando regains his magic, attacking with a flare of fire, so intense that it seems that Yuri was going to end burned next to the orcs, and this means that they do not react in time, considering it a dirty strategy. However, just like last time, Yuri dispels the attack by directing the flames to them instead of him, automatically asks him if he still believes in that, have the advantage, but in that you hear Another big explosion behind his back, causing him to curse himself and his fucking mouth, to go around singing victory ahead of time. And little by little more enemies begin to emerge from the ground. So he recognizes that it is his turn to become a little more extreme, and asks Hernando to throw another ball, even more powerful than the previous one. The problem is that he looks at it with a face that it could not do it even if I wanted to, since it is so exhausted that from now on it will. It's his turn to fight alone. And for this moment Yuri recognizes that throwing oneself in the midst of enemies, only to eliminate the sorcerer, was not the smartest decision ever made. Let's say he was a little carried away by the last victory, but despite the possibility of dying, is more present than ever. Not afraid. What none of it's knows you already went through that once, as he died crawling and running away like a worm. That's why he won't run away, and with all the confidence in the world, asks him to be attacked once and for all. However, the surprise comes when the foreigner continues, recognizing that he likes his attitude but that it is not the time of walking with death speeches. And as a sum it is, says that when someone is ready to die, is that he really lives and likes it, much that I have learned it, because only then can he consider them a worthy learner. It is more asks you to prepare, because this is his first lesson. For today he will show you the art of the sword, Chiang Siam, and thus takes a deep breath. Positions and attacks. Generating a fire-colored energy halo of pure fruit of his sword's speed, with which it sweeps away dozens of orcs in a matter of seconds. And at that time Yuri is paralyzed at the sight of, first-hand, the power of one of the 10 strongest in the world, continent but abroad. Insists that the election is not over and will only help him eliminate half of them, to which the prota begins to attack, trying to imitate their movements, and from a distance, the foreigner recognizes that he is a very strange boy. Their movements are abrupt and messy, but at the same time, and practical. The type of talent, outstanding, that even without looking for it will always end up bringing with it people interested in following it, and in the midst of chaos, thinks the prota is a star that shines in a form, tenuous but constant, just the kind of signal I needed to know that he was on the right track, and wonders if this star will be devoured by the darkness that threatens with covering the world, or continue to grow until he rises as the new star. No matter what, you know that the only way he has to find out is to stay and go on. Observing very closely, and at the same time the fight goes on, the more and more explosions detonate along the. And the more explosions mean the more orcs. The situation is critical, to the point where Yuri orders Jared and Lauren to get their act together, and be in charge of stopping them as soon as start to leave that underground, and in this way, both are positioned right next to the new explosions and start cutting off heads in the best way they can. The problem is that there are too many tunnels. Subway and unfortunate are faster than they seem, so it is not a strategy that they can maintain in the long term. And if that were not enough, Yuri has a very bad feeling around this whole situation. For the fact that such a large group has been set in motion can't mean anything good. This means that apart from the orc sorcerer there is something else down there, by what his hand says, on the ground, and concentrates all your senses until you can visualize perfectly the tracks of the enemies moving underground, and most importantly, a kind of worm, giant, that are using to dig the tunnels, and as soon as he manages to locate it, he comes out, running to the direction of the creature, and although neither Jared nor Lauren have idea of what is happening, the blonde has no doubts in following him blindly, because his words, his prince, is always right. In addition, the evidence supports it, because when they arrive at the right place, realize that this area is already being guarded by another sorcerer who, seeing that they had discovered his plan, opens the earth in two. I need orcs to come to light, including 3 orbucks that at first glance look extremely powerful. And at that moment the leader points to the prota and starts saying a lot of crazy things that no one understands, so they assume it is choosing him as the, and that everyone will have to take an opponent, and with that clear, Yuri gives them a simple order: don't forget. While thinking there is something there below, that it is not orc, and that the battle will not really end until that does not delete it. That means that the orbital in front to him is nothing more than a hindrance, so he attacks it with everything he has, starting an exchange of blows that looks quite even, until one of these Yuri is taken by surprise when his opponent's sword almost ripped out one of his eyes. Everything happens so fast that the only thing left for it is a trace of blood. Luckily he manages to dodge it just in time to avoid going out. Heard that if you can show weakness it does not happen. Unnoticed by the orbital that licks the blood remains left in their sword, with a sadistic smile, and Yuri, he has no doubt that the guy knows how to handle this edge well. Yet he does not let those fears dominate him, and maintaining confidence tells him that he will need finish that quickly to get back to his men, before attacking again with greater intensity than before. The problem is that even that was not enough. That Lord Ball dodges and deflects all critical attacks, causing it to do nothing but wear out for every second. What happens is as if I am able to read all of them, and every single one of its movements, and what is even worse, as if I had no intentions to end the battle soon. As if I were only there to buy time, and at that rate your men will get the worst of it. And just when the prota is about to fall into that spiral of self-loathing concerns, remember the words Isumistra, who always told him that when his mind, the sword also begins to drift to another path, and however urgent the battle may be, if his sword cannot keep up, will not be able to reach the enemy. So always the time will come in which I have to leave my worries back to concentrate on the reason why he is fighting. Automatically, those words give him back his clarity, and more focused than ever before, jumps on his opponent, taking sufficient momentum to impact with absolute force, but not against Lord Ball, or against the other souls on that, but against the ground, forcing you to go out to what has always been his real goal, the worm that has been digging tunnels all that time. The blow is so powerful that it triggers a strong wave, expansive, attracts the attention of each and every person on the, including Jared, that can't help but turn aside, wondering if Yuri will be there. Well, after painting effort, and in that he notices that this remains standing in the face of his enemy. However, the effort was so great that it did not takes time to fall to the ground. Well, he understand all the mana he had in his body. Not only that, but retaliation is worse than I expected and can't even stand up again. So the only thing that makes him feel calm is that the worm should be as serious as he is. Lately, the opposite is true, because from a distance, Lauren diverts her opponent's gaze, just to see firsthand how the creature keeps moving, and in a matter of seconds, 4 other heads come out of the underground ready to attack the prota from behind. Fortunately, Jared arrives at his side just in time to knock him down and dodge the blow. With the blonde takes the opportunity to leave his opponent aside and put an end to the threat before it is too late. And on the other hand, Yuri thanks Jared for saving his life, to which he tells him that if he is really grateful, should notify them before I do something stupid like that next time. And with nothing more to say, stands up, and seeing that the prota is no longer in a position to fight, acknowledges that they prefer hands of him and Lauren in taking care of both the 3 bulls as of the creature that never before had ever seen in his life. The situation is so serious that the blonde loudly states that dying protecting the prince will be the highest honor if, however, Yuri does everything he can to stand up and raises his sword, insisting that there is no need to think. That's because they will win, and despite not being in a position to fight, standing idly by is not an option for him. So he orders them to be released while making a bait in the hope of creating an opportunity so that they can attack, and the shadow comes when out of nowhere someone tell him to take it easy, and right there he is interrupted by Graham, who was sent there with a good handful of soldiers, the same Ragna, to support them. And after that the balance leans next to the alliance, and once it's all over, the next thing we see is the protagonist resting in the infirmary while Graham is in charge of making the official report of what happened. It turns out that after Yuri attacked the worm, the enemies began to escape a grand toilet, so it will probably concluded that they did not have no chance of winning once his entry had been blocked from, means that they also did not get capture none to obtain information on the target behind the attack. But Ragnar does not hesitate to congratulate Graham. Well, if it weren't for the fact that he arrived just in time, we've lost one of the most important members of the alliance, and after that he asks him to retire and remains alone with the leading role. Even though it is still fine spoiled, he does not hesitate to reproach him forever, end up becoming the center, and mentions that this is just what he needs to become in the future of the train. Oh, why? It's a good thing Yuri didn't hear such, because he would have finished dying and several days go by until he finally wakes up with the horrible feeling that someone was wishing for a fate worse than death, and fortunately the horrible taste in the mouth disappears when comes to visit him, clarifying that the battle came out better than I would have expected, and that in all the time he's been asleep, I've managed to move forward as planned, and asks him how he feels right there. And Yuri discovers that his mana completely healed, what she attributes to herself, because he was in charge of healing him personally using his best sacred techniques, and then thanking him for his. Asks him where they are, but Silvio insists that the best thing to do is to show it to you by guiding you outside the store, and he is paralyzed when he sees where they are located, as they have finally reached their final destination of the forces allies. The strength of Sylvia takes the opportunity to thank him, recognizing that they would not have come this far, and in such a short time, without their skills. Not only that, but he is the reason why they have so few casualties, so he insists that they are very lucky of having it. And the detail is that instead of accepting the compliment, Yuri says it's time to make him an important request, and romantically to ask him if it could pretend they are dating. Sylvia doesn't understand what the fuck she is referring to, but Yuri explains that it will soon arrive, a marriage proposal from someone who really loves, and that she will also be able to take advantage of this to get rid of any suitor. Accepts, clarifying that it only has one request, but we were left with the doubt, and so on. Season final, chapter 53. Well people, I hope it made your day, a smile, or simply accompany them. And if so, please leave your like, your nice comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so on Instagram. I am doing all the warnings in case you want to follow me, and here will be more videos in case you want to see more. And thanks for everything. I love you all a lot.